Hello and welcome to episode 78 of Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike.
It's been kind of a sad week in the music world, Mike.
It sure has, especially if you're a jazz fan, really.
Yeah.
There were two really surprising deaths this week, and then we had a third one as well.
Right.
But let's have you can start talking about that. So anyway, we'll play our musical necrology theme. There it is, the Dies Irae.
Yes. We haven't had to play it in a while, but...
Yeah, but now, you know...
Well, I guess we'll go through the list in, unfortunately, in age order, youngest to oldest.
You're going to go in age order? Okay.
And so our first death this week was Jamie Branch, a jazz composer and trumpeter who passed away on August 22nd at the age of 39. 39.
That was really shocking for me, and I thought this would be the bad news of the week. I actually have her three Fly or Die recordings, and they're a bit of a challenge. I like them, but I was kind of interested in hearing where she was going to go, and now she's gone at 39, and I'm rather sad about that. I'm going to have to give those a listen again. So Jamie Branch. Yeah.
Didn't know her music too well. I had listened a little bit.
Yeah, she's pretty adventurous.
Adventurous electronics.
That's a good thing.
Not really my thing, but the more the merrier. Variety is good.
I'm happy to hear people stretching out, and so that was we don't know the cause, and that just in a way that kind of makes it a little harder to bear, because you don't really you don't have you have the sense that this person was taken away, as opposed to, well, that happened and it's settled. So we don't know why, but Jamie Branch died 39 years old. Very sad. Yeah. But then the big shock. I thought that would be it, but then a big shock, an even bigger shock came. Well, for us anyway.
Probably all jazz fans have heard this news already, but Joey DeFrancesco, the great organist, the big organist of his generation, and more. I mean, he's a really good trumpet player too, and sax. He was getting pretty good on sax, and he's even sang on his last album.
Right.
And he passed away at the age of 51 on August 25th.
Right, just a few days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one hit me pretty hard. I was kind of surprised too, because I'm not a huge, I listen to plenty of jazz, but I don't really attached to it the way that you do, or that real jazz musicians do, and things like that. And yet, this felt really bad to me. I felt like a real, because I love like you, I love the Hammond organ,
right? And
he really was the best of his generation, and we really liked listening to him a lot. He also has one of the best jazz Christmas albums ever, and I would recommend that. Home for the Holidays, it's called. It was released in 2014, and that's part of my Christmas listening every year now.
This one really struck me as I've told you and probably said this story maybe back at the beginning of the podcast, but when I was a youngster, still in high school, at a very small school, but with a great music program, in the public schools. The arts are really important, I think. And we had opportunities to play at music festivals and competitions since I was 12 or 13 years old. My junior year in 1987, we submitted an audition to the first Downbeat Magazine Music Fest competition. That was for high school and university bands. And our band from our small school got picked. We were, kind of in awe. So we went out there to Chicago and played our best. And we didn't win a band award, but I got a solo award, a stage band all-star. Cool. I got to go up on the stage with, all these great players from around the country, get my little award. And that came out, the winners came out in an issue of Downbeat Magazine. So I looked at it at the time, being 17, and I said, well, I'll just save this, and went on to, continue my music studies and things. And a couple of years later, I started hearing names, and I looked back in that magazine, and I noticed on the list with me were the names Christian McBride, Roy Hargrove, and Joey DeFrancesco.
Yeah, three giants. Wow.
At that time, I guess I think Christian McBride and Joey DeFrancisco went to the same school in Philadelphia, and they were already, huge, monstrous players when they were teenagers. Right. And I think not shortly after that, or around the same time, Joey DeFrancisco actually got a recording contract, and he was playing with, big jazz names. So those names just jumped out when I saw that. And then, a few years ago, I was shocked because Roy Hargrove passed away 2018 at age 49. And now Joey DeFrancisco is gone. So, and I'm a year older than him. So
yeah, both too young.
Yeah, it just really makes you think.
There's a good, there's an episode of Jazz Night in America hosted by Christian McBride where he talks to Joey DeFrancisco. From 2019, I think it was, but it was pretty recent. It was a good conversation. It's very long.
They were best of friends.
Yeah, people might want to hear that. And also, we talked about Joey DeFrancisco's most recent album, More Music, on episode 39 of the Adult Music Podcast entitled Organic High. And we've pinned that to the top of our Facebook page if anybody wants to hear it. It'll be there at the top for the rest of the week. Next week we'll take it down unless a lot of people start listening. Then we'll leave it there for a while longer.
I read I think Christian McBride has written something up in his memory.
Right.
It's so sad, but he seemed unstoppable. And there's a story in there, I think he said, when he came back from playing with Miles Davis, he said, I'm going to learn to play the trumpet. And Christian McBride is like, why? He's like, I just want to. And, and then he's just, seemed to be able to conquer any task that he set his mind to. So
it's really great. And he was a good trumpet player, but
he was good. Yeah.
We want to hear him play the organ, though. The audience likes hearing that. Yeah. I certainly do. And he really stretched out on a lot of his solo albums. But if you want to hear him really, on the organ, like at his best, his recent best anyway, let's say, the two most recent albums he was on as a sideman, that would be Christian McBride's album for Jimmy West and Oliver.
Yeah,
from 2020. It's a smoking one, and he's great on that. And then there was one in 2021 by Tom Cohen, the drummer, called My Take, and Joey plays on 4 of the 5 tracks on that, and he's smoking on that one too. So those will be a good sample of where he was at, just recently. So I recommend those. I've been listening to those this week, really.
All right, we've got one more death in the jazz world, and this is
an elder statesman this time.
Elder statesman, passing away at the age of 93. Creed Taylor, visionary record producer and the founder of Impulse and CTI labels. I think he started out for Bethlehem Records, and he stayed for a couple years, and he got some big jazz names recorded: Carmen McRae, Mingus, Herbie Mann, Charlie Shavers, and also I think the J.J. Johnson Kai Winding Quintet. Then he left Bethlehem to join Paramount, ABC Paramount, and then a few years later he made the Impulse label, because he wanted to make a kind of current jazz focused label. And let's see, there he signed John Coltrane to Impulse. So all those great recordings on the Impulse came through his work there. And then he left not too long after that to accept a job at Verve. The thing that people remember him most for is that he was kind of strong in promotion of the bossa nova craze. And so the Jobim Stan Getz, whole girl from Ipanema, he wanted to have that, really pushed in a serious way. And he went down to Brazil and met Jobim. And then, of course, Desafinado became a big hit. He was largely involved in those projects. And then he also produced on Verve recordings for Wes Montgomery, Jimmy Smith, Bill Evans, Cal Tjader, too. So a big name in the recording end of the jazz world passes on at a ripe old age of 93. So thank you for all those great records.
And to all three who have left us this week.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad the week's over. We can kind of recalibrate now.
Let's hope we don't have to play the theme for a while. Right.
Yeah. And only please for the elder statesmen who have lived long
That's
lives.
Right. All right, let's move into the music section, Happier Things. Before we get started, I remind everyone in the episode description, you can find links to Spotify and Apple Music for all the recordings we're going to talk about. Also at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. You get all the music in one spot on Deezer. You can also follow us there. Just look username Adult Music Podcast. You can listen to the podcast there as well. And if you don't see the full description or the links are not clickable on whatever app or platform you listen to us on, come over to our host site, podbean.com, Podbean, and all the links for this and past episodes are easy to reach. If you enjoy the podcast, please do follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or a review, that helps us get listed in the browsing categories, and that helps us make our audience grow and makes us happy. You can also come follow us on our Facebook page, get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. You can leave a message or a comment there. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd be happy to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com.
Yeah. All right. So speaking of happiness, I'm kind of it'd be really happy if we had like millions of listeners and had classical and jazz music, being really popular like they once were. But I actually posted on my personal Facebook site this week about how happy I am just hanging around in the morning listening to all these records. It's been a really enjoyable summer that way. I could live like that, I think. Okay, that was earlier in the week before all the news of these deaths started coming in. So then I got it pulled me away. I wanted to hear their records now all of a sudden, just so I could kind of remember them. Okay, anyway, here we go. For this week, I had some artists that I actually like that were really my choices. I was kind of some artists I've known about for quite a while. And the first one is an ensemble, a choral ensemble called Doulce Mémoire. They're French, and they are directed by Denis Raisin Dadre. And I have the album. Let me just get this out of the way here. The album is Desprez, and the album's called Tant, vous, aime, How Much I Love You. Now, Josquin, of course, is a Renaissance era composer. We did a whole thing about him last year in his it was an anniversary year. It was like, I can't remember which anniversary it was, but it was some crazy huge number, like 450 years or something. No, it was like 1521 to 500 years since his death or something. Okay. So anyway, this album is on the Ricercar label, which is a Belgian early music record label founded way back in 1980. I've only heard about them recently. And I want to talk about Doulce Mémoire a bit, the ensemble. They were founded in 1989. I first heard about them in 2000, the year 2000. So that's already 22 years I've known about them. They did an album of Neapolitan songs, very, very old Neapolitan songs from the 16th century. So O Sole Mio wasn't on it. That's from the 19th century. These are really old, okay? And I didn't know any of the songs on it. It was just fantastic. Like all Neapolitan songs throughout these centuries, they're very melodic and really enjoyable, and some interesting chord changes in them too. The album, if you want to check it out, was called Viva Napoli, and it was on the Naive label, another French label. So I really loved that record. And then back then, somehow, this is before the internet, really. I kind of lost track of them a bit because it was a French label. I was going through like these British companies. It was a small French labels that they were recording on, and they weren't as well distributed as they are today. So I couldn't really get a hold of any of their other albums. And then in 2019, just was it 3 years ago now, they released an ambitious album called Leonardo da Vinci, La Musique Secrète, which this is on the Alpha label, and it really knocked me out. I bought this on a CD. It was I think it was a 2 CD set, but it came in this big sort of rectangular box with a whole book in it, and it was a program of music that was aligned with these Renaissance era paintings by Leonardo. So they'd pick like a Leonardo painting and then kind of have certain works that sort of went with them. I mean, they're usually religious paintings, so you have a lot of songs with religious text to match with them, and it was really fantastic. The sound, they have a really unique sound. I really like their sound, so I'm always happy to hear them. So both albums were intriguing. Now they did this one of Josquin, and I figured we had to hear this, and I had to talk about at least them once on this podcast. So this is on the Ricercar label. This is not a fancy release in any way. It's just a CD. It's got a good booklet in it. The booklet notes mostly talk about Josquin's life and how our understanding of that in recent years has changed. Like, we used to think he spent most of his life in Italy, but he didn't. He was traveling around quite a bit. He was a Flemish composer. Also, Desprez used to be thought of as kind of a place marker name, but it actually might be his family name now, because he's usually just listed as Josquin, not as Desprez, right? You'll find him under J in your record store, which is his first name, his given name. Anyway, he's referred to as Josquin. So let's talk about this record of Josquin by Doulce Mémoire, Denis Raisin Dadre. Now, a lot of these tracks are going to be sort of two poems combined together, which was kind of the way things were done, especially in the medieval era, but in the Renaissance it kind of got hung over quite a bit. I should also mention Josquin is most famous for his masses. These are all, or almost all, secular works. So there's songs and just sort of things like that for entertainments or whatever. First track, there are 25 tracks on this album. This is good, and they're all short, which is also pretty nice. So it's about an hour-long program. And they're all of these titles are in Old French, so with Y's for where we would put an I today. So the first one is Si je perdois mon ami, A-M-Y, my friend, right? And Par un matin me levé. All right, this one starts with a lovely soft lute opening. We're going to hear a lot of this thing. They have great instrumentation. Please, these works don't come with tabulature. They come with tablature, I guess, but no indications of which instrument to use. So this is all the ensemble's choice, and I really like the gentle instruments they've mostly chosen for this album, except for one or two tracks that we'll get to later.
They let the geese out of the barn.
Yeah, the geese get let out of the barn occasionally. But on this one, no, we're in someone's bedchamber here. A lovely soft lute opening. Always kind of sounds like a little afterglow for me. The text is a meditation on the death of a friend. Well, maybe no afterglow here. And it's movingly sung by the soprano, Clara Coutuli, I guess. The music speeds up. We have a male vocalist, which is tenor Hugh Primard, starting the second verse with imitative harmony from the soprano. This is really beautiful. Nice writing here, and beautifully performed too. The rest of the ensemble comes in for a lot of the overlapping imitative harmony for the rest of the verses. So in this way, the piece builds an excitement. Apparently, in the text, the friend has been murdered. And in the third verse, the vocalist wishes to find the one, quote, who has banished all my joy to be at the bottom of a deep well. Wow, that's quite a statement to make in the first track there. Passions ran deep in the Renaissance. Maybe I should do that. Wish my enemies to be found at the bottom of a deep well. We don't really hear that anymore. All right, track 2. Vivrai-je toujours en telle peine. This one is sung in a slower, more syrupy way. When I say syrupy, I don't mean sweet. I mean more like there's a molasses quality to the lines, like melting. They're kind of gooey, melting into each other sort of thing. Featuring different polyphonic verses, all enunciating their texts clearly, weaving with each other so that the words can't really be understood. This was Robert Greenberg mentions in one of his Great Courses lectures that this was the big paradox of the Renaissance. They wanted clarity, so each line was written so that each word could be understood with absolute clarity. But then when you put all these polyphonic verses together, you can't understand them again. So although each line is absolutely clear, they get blurred when they mix together. So it's a big paradox, really. So when you listen to this, make sure you give equal importance to each voice. All right, that's the that we usually don't listen to the lower voices, and in Renaissance music it's imperative, because in polyphonic music all voices are equally important. We're used to pop music, we listen to the top voice usually. Okay, but give it a try. Okay, so there were recorders accompanying on this track, and they sweetened the sound. I like the recorder sound on this album too. Track 3, Qui bel amour. This starts with a lute played by Pascal Bouquet. He accompanies the baritone Mathieu Lelèvre, I think. He's pretty much a high baritone, but I'm pretty sure this is him because he gets into the tenor range a little bit, the lower tenor range. There's also a harp. The Renaissance harp is a beautiful instrument too. It's a little smaller than the romantic harp, played by Bérengère Sardin. We hear Clara Coutouilly comes back in on soprano to sing imitative polyphony. The song is about the fickleness of lovers. Some things never change, do they? Qui bel amour a souvent si le remue. He who has beautiful loves often changes them. These are really, yeah, okay, anyway. What was going on back then? I wonder. Okay, lovely singing by the two soloists. Yeah, I guess some things never change. We tend to think of the past as being kind of more solid and holy than we are today. Apparently not.
Maybe
not. It's dependent on your station. All right, track 4, À l'heure que je vous PX. I don't know what that is. Okay, this is an instrumental and it features a chaume. This is the geese in the barn here.
Yeah,
played by Elsa Frank, and bombards played by Johann Maître, Denis Raisin Dadre, the director, and Jérémy Papasergio, and all nasal sounding, very loud, and they kind of sounded to me like someone wiggling his hand on his nose at you and saying yeah like a kid. Yeah. This is a bracing and invigorating track. It'll
kind of fun
if you're being lulled into some peace. The first 3 tracks, this will take you right out of it. So anyway, track 5, Ricercar Ottava. Vincenzo Capirola is the composer here, not Josquin. And it's an instrumental. It's a gentle track played on the lute by Pascal Bouquet and on the harp Bérengère Sardin. All lute and harp, all tracks with the lute and the harp include each other. So there's no like lute solo or harp solo. They play together. Beautiful work. Track 6, I remember this one from my music education days, Petite Camusette. There are different. This is another one that Robert Greenberg actually singles out for how different performances of a Renaissance work can sound completely different. And this one sounds different than the ones that I heard back then. This particular one features the above lute and harp with a recorder. It sets the melody for the 2 polyphonic works we'll hear in the next 2 tracks. And here we hear the countertenor Paulin Bundgen. Track 7, Celle Mamera and Petite Camusette, composed by Johannes Akkagame, who was, I think, Josquin's predecessor. He was the great composer of the generation before Josquin. This is his a cappella harmony, the first time we're hearing this on this album, with all voices combining on Celle Mamera, which is a song about a person who's in love with someone who's not returning his interest. Immortal, I'm telling you, these themes. And Petite Camusette, who will be, the singer sings that she will be the death of him, and I guess the themes do go together. The track moves on weaving lines, the 2 texts not easy to decipher from the song, but beautifully sung. I should mention at this point that this album is beautifully recorded, and that really has always been the case with Doulce Mémoire. All their recordings sound great, the ones I've heard anyway, which are 3 of them, actually. Okay, in track 8 we hear Josquin's Petite Camusette, a pretty famous work. It's polyphonic, featuring all voices and recorders, and it's begun in the bass. Guillaume Ulry is the bass voice. It's very brief. Track 9, an instrumental. Mein Herz in hohen Freuden ist, by Anonymous, found in Das Lochamer Liederbuch. It's an instrumental track featuring a recorder and lute. Really beautiful again. There's some nice off-center notes in this performance. I don't know who the soloist is, as 4 are listed and the one on this track isn't indicated. So I don't know who it is that's playing the recorder on this. All right, track 10 is the title track of the album, Tant, vous, aime. This comes with the same orchestration as the previous, so they go kind of into each other. But there's a singer now. The tenor Hugh Primard to start it out, and then the soprano Clara Coutouilly, whose voice is really beautiful. I really enjoyed. Renaissance voices aren't quite the big, pinning you to the back wall operatic voices that we had in the 18th and especially 19th and 20th centuries. This is one of those songs where the singer sings his love to Bergeronnette, who is a lovely shepherd girl. We heard a whole album of these ones back in the day. The notes indicate that the piece is incomplete. It's a slow, romantic work. I'm sure it worked in seducing the shepherd girl. We don't know by the text if he seduced her, but if he played music like this, surely he did. Track 11, Belle pour l'amour de vous. A recorder ensemble accompanies the full vocal ensemble here, and the text could be romantic or sinister. The singer has followed or stalked his love to this town out of love for him or her. It could be a woman stalking the man. We don't really know from the text, but I think we can guess that it's the man following the woman out of his love or stalking him, depending on how you want to think about it. Anyway, track 12, En Avoir. Konrad Pohlmann is the composer, and this comes from Das Lochhammer Liederbuch. It's an light instrumental piece with a little charming lift in its step. It's played by an alto recorder, and so that means there are two possible soloists, and I'm going to guess it's the director, Denis Raisin Dadre himself. He's accompanied by a harp and lute. Track 13, Que vous, madame, and coupled with In pace. The recorder ensemble introduces this piece, which is a little more low-key and darker than the previous. There's contrast here. I'm guessing the text is in pace, mostly. The singer simply indicates that he will rest, and the accompaniment is Que vous, madame, in the recorders. So I'm guessing we're not really getting the words for Que vous, madame. You can hear some proto-Bach in his cantatas in the way the voices move more statically than the accompaniment. I kind of picked that out of this. Track 14, Agnus Dei. Okay, this is a religious track, but it's instrumental. This is Heinrich Isaac from his Missa La Spagna, but it's an instrumental. It's a lute and harp duet, light and gentle. All of these duets are so beautifully taken and always welcome to the ears. It's very brief at 1 minute and 36 seconds. And then we get some more contrast with my favorite tune of the entire Renaissance, if I had to do my top tunes, El Grillo. And I was going crazy about this on the version we heard last year on the Josquin album on the Decca label. And I was going crazy about this one too because I love this tune. This is sung by the entire ensemble. They give it a bit of a comic approach with their pronunciation and harmony interpretation. Some of them go a little bit off of the harmony and get this real kind of broad, almost like throaty sound. Always welcome to the ears. Brief at 1 minute. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's charming as always. I love the whole dale, dale, breve, breve, grillo, grillo, canta, canta. El grillo en bon cantor. It's so good and so catchy. Make sure you hear it. I love this tune. El Grillo means the cricket. Talks about how the cricket is such a good singer. And they're encouraging him to sing more. As Italians would. If you're a good singer. Anyway. Track 16. In te, domine speravi. This is sung by a soprano, accompanied by lute and harp. It's a lament to God, bemoaning the singers having requested relief from torment and not finding it. What the actual issue isn't stated in the lyric. At the end of sections, the vocal ensemble repeats the last line, but this is soprano Clara Coutouil's piece to sing. She's got an appealing light voice. The piece falls gently on the ear. Track 17, we get a few two tracks with this character named Scaramella. I guess a popular character from the Renaissance era. This is called Scaramella fa la galla, and this is composed by Loisette Compère. This has shawms and bombards. It's very loud. Scaramella is a comic character. The vocalists come in after an introduction, and they have to sing loudly in order to be heard over the racket that these instruments make. There's something martial about this piece, and at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, the rhythm suddenly changes to triplets, which is always cool. Scaramella is a character who pretends to be upper class, but his shoes don't match and give him away as some poor bumpkin. So, object of mockery at the time, the lower class guy trying to pass for upper class. Track 18, Scaramella va alla guerra. He's going to war now. This is a cappella at the beginning, but the showman bombards come back in for a turkey shoot. It sounds like that anyway. I'm not complaining. They sound great.
They're fun. It's a sound you don't hear every day. Yeah,
it's a sound you don't hear often. It'll catch you by surprise if you don't hear it. They are entertaining. Don't don't take my words to mean anything negative there. Okay, it's similar to the previous Caramella piece. Track 19, Basse, Danse, Cœur Angoisseux. This is a brief instrumental interlude for gentle lute and harp, and the programming of this album is well done, I should mention. There's a lot of variety of sound and also contrast between pieces, like the works with the shawms come at beautifully calculated times to kind of lull you out of your complacency, and then we'll get back to something quiet. It's really nicely done, easy to listen to all the way through. Track 20, Ma Bouche Rit by Joonas Ahonen, again, Josquin's predecessor. Means my mouth laughs. The soprano sings this with lute and harp accompaniment, each instrument appealingly in a different speaker. I rather enjoyed that. You can kind of pick them out with the singer in the center. Her mouth laughs, but her mind, or her heart, weeps because she's been betrayed by her lover. Kuti sings these songs with a light sadness appropriate to the era, like the feeling she's singing about is more universal than personal. Lovely voice for a lovely tune. Track 21, we hear, I guess, Josquin's setting for this piece, Ma Bouche Rit, again. This track continues from the previous, but brings the bass voice, Guillaume Olry. The bass only sings My voice laughs and my heart weeps, over and over again, as the soprano continues to lament her feelings. The bass sounds like it's picked up the soprano's sadness as enfolding her in an accompanying sadness in his line. It's a really lovely track. Track 22, Bergeret Savoisienne, a duet featuring countertenor Paulin Bundgen and baritone Mathieu Lelevreur. This is a song where a shepherd professes his love for a Savoyard shepherdess. I'm guessing the third verse is the shepherdess's reply, and she merely says her desires won't change. The voices don't indicate a change of speaking voice, though, so it's hard to know what's going on. It's a gentle, enjoyable tune. I'm guessing she rebuffs him, actually, in this song. Okay, next track, Bergeretta Savoyena. This is from a collection called Canti C, and it's an instrumental piece. Recorder ensemble, again, nice variety. Now we're hearing these wind instruments, the recorders, on the same piece as the above. It's played at the same speed as the previous track, and I like the masked recorder sound here. Really catches the ear's attention. And yeah, it rings for some time. I like the sound. Track 24, we're almost there. Hang on. À l'ombre d'une buissonnette, an a cappella piece. The text is a love tryst with Bellon, finding his love in the garden and asking for her love. She flirtatiously rejects him, and then he tries to lure her with bread. And that's how the text ends. That one. Yeah. I don't know.
Wow.
I think you have to spend more these days.
Yeah.
And that's how the text ends. I guess he was successful from this. Then track 25, they really leave us with this sad, kind of tragic track called Une jeune fillette sur comment peut avoir joie. So he's
the 15-year-old single mother story. Yeah. It's a pretty shocking text here.
Yeah, it's really sad too. Anyway, the tenor, Hugh Primard, starts this a cappella. Nice voice, like the sopranos, to hear ringing by itself in silent space. He sings about a 15-year-old girl who gets it on with her boyfriend and gets pregnant, and then is reprimanded by her mother. The second verse, you got to remember, this is the 1600s, and the 1500s, actually, that we're talking about here. The second verse has the soprano, Clara Coutouilly, responding a cappella that she knows she'll get money from the man because he's a good man, so she trusts him. You know, she's pregnant, he's gonna help her. The third verse has both soprano and tenor duetting with lute and harp accompaniment. Again, placed in separate speakers. It sounds great. Here the girl says she did it willingly and is happy with what she's done. And in the fourth verse, we learn that the person who wrote this song is the man who deflowered her and got her pregnant. Unless it's another guy entirely and the whole scene is going to repeat. Who knows? We don't find out what happens afterwards, but if this guy's bragging about it, I don't know. You know?
Yeah.
He might run away. Anyway, we are left with that. So anyway, that's the whole program, and it's another beautifully performed and recorded album by Doulce Mémoire, the third of their many albums to enter my collection. I always enjoy their performances, their tone, their programming. It's really the programming that makes this album go beyond most Renaissance music albums. Raisin Dadre has organized enough variety of instrumentation and style that the ear is constantly engaged and the listener wonders what the next piece will be like. That's certainly what I was doing. The album is mostly gentle, but with some invigorating works. That's the word I chose for the shawms, invigorating, and bombards. Boy, when this was called a bombard, you already have a good idea what it's going to sound like, don't you? I think that's where they came with the word, a bombardment or something. Just launching these sounds at you. The ensemble has a personal way of performing that makes the listener feel close to them. This is one of the qualities about this ensemble that I like so much. I feel like I'm being invited into their group when I listen to these albums. There's something very personable and personal about the way they perform these tracks. It kind of feels like they're friends introducing you to new music rather than a performing group on a stage. Yet they're as professional sounding as an ensemble could possibly be. Yeah, that personal element draws me to them. See if you can hear that. And I like this a lot.
Joonas music's always really interesting, especially with all the little harmonic surprises that come along the way. And the recording here is really clear, rich acoustics. It sounds great. And as you mentioned, I wrote overall the programming is just really well done.
That's always the case with them.
Yeah, it really brings out the contrast in the material, the different types of melodies and feels, but also the instrumentation and varying the vocal and instrumental pieces. Mostly, other than the bombards, it's beautiful and calming. I think it makes for really perfect early morning or evening listening, either or. It'll focus you in and give you lots of nice things to listen to. So highly recommend it.
And the bombards gave my speaker a workout.
The waterfowl in the area will be coming by your house.
Yeah, they all ran away. All right, next, one of my favorite set of piano works, Isaac Albéniz, Iberia. This is a set of 12 piano pieces that kind of are sort of evocations of different places in Spain. That's really the first set of works of its kind. I'll get to that in a little bit. Here, the pianist is Nelson Goerner, who is an Argentinian pianist, and he won the Franz Liszt competition in 1986. And I've got a lot of his recordings. He's done a lot of Debussy and Brahms. This is on the Alpha Classics label. Goerner's album covers always have some uninteresting picture of him on them. He's usually just looking at you, or you see the side of his head. Here, you see his back, and he's sitting on it's a black and white photo of him sitting on a set of stairs from the back. So, it's hard to remember which album is which just from the album cover. Because you listen to rock albums, you think, oh, it's Sgt. Pepper. You picture that album cover immediately.
Right.
Not the case with these. Anyway, that's his style, so I'm not going to complain. Anyway, the thing about these works, Albéniz, Iberia, this is one of those works where there's one recording of these that's head and shoulders above every other one, and probably will be forever. And that's the one made by Alicia de la Rocha in, I guess, 1980 or the early 80s, 82 or something like that. She was a Spanish pianist, and she captured the Spanish feel of all of these works so perfectly that I've just never heard anything even close. I mean, she seems to pull all the elements out. And these are highly virtuosic works. They require like strength and a lot of virtuosity. And yet you also, while you're doing all this, you have to weight your notes very carefully, because there's a lot of counterpoint that kind of shouldn't really get in the way of the melody, but it's kind of making itself known. It's not just disappearing into the background. So it's a really hard work to pull off. And the interesting thing about this recording is this is probably the best recording of these works I've heard besides the De La Rocha ones. She's still number one. But Goerner captures the whole Spanish element of these beautifully, and he makes them, he's got a unique approach to them. He's not really, he who knows, he may be playing against the De La Rocha interpretations, but he doesn't sound like her. See, he sounds really like he's got his own ideas about how these should go, and that really captured me. He's got the whole Spanish element, and he's kind of made them a little new here. So let's talk about these. There are 12 tracks. They're all fairly long, but they come in at about anywhere between 5 and 11 minutes, let's say, but they're pretty involved. There's a lot going on in each one of them.
Yeah.
And they're tiring to listen to for that reason, because your ear is getting it's getting a workout in the sense that there's a lot of detail to listen to, not in the fact that it's harsh or anything like that. It's actually really, all this music is really beautiful and entertaining, evocative as well. Okay, in fact, the first work is called Evocation. Let's see, Goerner starts this one slowly and meditatively, which is good. It captures a romantic mood in tune with the work's idiom. There's a pretty decent shaping of the Spanish melodic material with its downward-moving triplets. That da-na-na-na, you know, that kind of Spanish element that you always hear that really defines a piece as Spanish. And the clarity of Goerner's playing and the recording are both fantastic. This is a great recording, too. Good, clear piano sound, capturing all the detail of Goerner's playing. Now, some of these, there are some, if you look at the score of this, there are like sections marked pianissimo, like with 5 P's or 5 F's for fortissimo, you know? And he gets some really, Goerner is capable of these very light sounds on the quieter parts, and he can really come crashing down on the fortes, and I'll talk about that in a minute. He brings the bass melody out strongly at the 2-minute mark. That's where the melody is, with the right-hand accompaniment very clearly played and heard. And so it's not really fading in the background, sort of like these sort of distant bells when he plays it. He really sees them as a little more important. The Spanish feel is there, so he passes one of my tests for this work. It has to sound Spanish. I have a recording of this by one of my favorite pianists, Marc-André Hamelin, and he doesn't really capture the Spanish idiom very well. He's a great virtuoso and really puts these scores across well, but I feel like he doesn't have the Spanish quality to his sound, so I don't really listen to that one as often as I listen to the other one, like especially the De La Rocha one. It's not as outlined as it is on the De La Rocha recording, but nevertheless, this is well worth hearing. Goerner is going for something a bit different than De La Rocha's straight and definitive, in my mind, interpretation. He has a light, beautiful tone in the quieter parts. It's enchanting. I was really sort of moved by that, leaning forward in my chair to really catch it all. Really wonderful. I like the way he does the endings on these pieces in this particular book. He ends in the final 2 notes. They're kind of like dun, dun. You know, it's just a dominant, dominant tonic note. Incidentally, I should also mention there are 12 of these tracks, but they're written in 4 books, so there's 3 pieces per book. That's probably a good way to listen to these. The Spanish rhythms can really start sounding samey after a while, so I would break these up if I were listening to them. All right, track 2 is El Puerto. This is my favorite work in the entire set, and it comes right near the beginning, which makes me happy. I love its liveliness and the evocation of bustle at a port. And the port in question here is El Puerto de Santa Maria in Cadiz. And the rhythm is a zapateado. Goerner goes for something strong and manly in the left hand. Whereas De La Rocha is a little more softer and kind of like, there's a little bit of, she's got a real magic to her phrasing. I don't know what it is. We hear all the discords written into the score very clearly on this performance. He's not shy with those. This has a bit of a dance quality to the melody. I was happy about that. The harsh chords that follow are harsh indeed. They're rather papered over in De La Rocha's recording. She's really after the Spanish feel of this, but I kind of liked hearing them here. I've actually played through this movement on the piano, and I noticed those dissonances. Like, wow, I didn't really realize they were there. After the opening, Goerner gets a bit slower and softer, as though the music is communicating a daydream. He miraculously manages not to lose tension when he does this and gets back to the dancier rhythm for the repeat of the opening line. That's the key to this set, too, is he'll sort of suddenly quieten and change, like, the rhythm will change a bit, but he's got this sense of the line of the entire piece, like it never slackens. And so you always feel like that sort of, the tension of the entire work from beginning to end is really taut. That's a real secret that I'd like to know how that's done. But great pianists all do it. I generally like this piece to be livelier than Goerner plays it. He goes for something a little dreamier, but I liked what he did. It's a nice matter-of-fact closing notes at the end. I like those. Track 3, El Corpus en Sevilla. This piece draws a sound picture of a religious procession in Seville. big sound in the fortissimi. Goerner really can make the piano ring out, sort of like he's like a Russian pianist, playing to the back of the hall. He's got a solid, strong, big-boned tone. The bells, or maybe they're flamenco guitars. I always hear them as bells because the piano. I think they might be flamenco guitars. They're supposed to be. At 1 minute and 23 seconds, that's in the upper part of the piano. Ring out strongly, as does the pedal point bass. The piano tone is a bit hard in these fortissimi. This is they're not really pliant. That's probably due to the firmness of the attack. So that's part of Goerner's sound. I prefer those really fortissimi to be a little more sort of pliant, a little warmer. But he's got like kind of like a hardness to his sound. That's part of his sound palette, I guess. In the second minute, the realization of the harmonic changes pianissimo are all beautiful and sensitive, warming the heart. The opening material returns just before the 4th minute. Goerner really isn't afraid to bring out dissonances or a gruff tone. Triplets erupt in the 5 minutes and 33-second section, and Goerner plays these again, loudly and firmly, making them register strongly. I'm amazed at the contrast Goerner is able to bring to different sections of this piece, now gruff and loud, now sensitive and tender, for example at 6 minutes and 30 seconds. The architecture of the piece comes across strongly enough that all of these contrasts register as inevitable, so we're in good hands in this piece, and really for the rest of these works. Okay, we move on to Book 2. This is track 4, Rondegna. The charming opening theme is beautifully rounded by Goerner, who takes a sudden forte for its repeat, and we hear the following material at 30 seconds at high volume and well-timed rhythm. The theme at 1 minute and 26 seconds comes across sunnily and joyfully. The piece then slows for a more meditative middle section at around 3 minutes, and with quieter accompaniment registering beautifully. Gorgeous ending too, with quiet notes followed by a burst of dancing rhythm, leading to the final cadence. Very nice. One of the best performances on the album, really. Rondegna, track 4. Track 5, Almeria. I don't think there's an accent on that I. I'm not sure. There's some tough-sounding thirds in the thematic material here. Tough-sounding meaning they sound tough to play. I was never good at thirds. This is a quieter piece, and the longest one too at 9 minutes and 45 seconds. The Spanish character of the opening material is well brought out. There are a few outbursts of fortissimi, which quickly disappear into the quieter material of the opening. Arpeggios in the bass introduce a new section at 3 minutes. Gorgeous playing at 4 minutes and 51 seconds as chords high up in the piano's range sprinkle down on the mid-range suspended notes. Suspended meaning held. Yeah, they're being held over. The material livens up at 5 minutes and 40 seconds to dispel the magic spell the previous section put on us, and we're back in the real world for a while. We get more enchantment at 7 minutes and 30 seconds, with a light Spanish-tinged melody playing high up in the piano's range over a vague rhythm underneath, consisting a lot of held notes so the rhythm becomes a bit hard to figure. We don't really hear the accents. Gorgeous performance. There's real magic in this particular piece. I would urge you to sample this one too. So tracks 4 and track 5 are the ones to sample, I would say. Track 6, Triana. Rhythm-based opening with a bit of a dance quality. Goerner rather plays down the cadential material at around 1 minute and 30 seconds, which I remember De La Rocha accenting heavily. And I like De La Rocha's approach. Also, Stephen Huff played this piece on his Stephen Huff's Spanish album, and he kind of tends to follow De La Rocha's template. He plays this beautifully too, by the way. He has 2 pieces from this set on that on his Stephen Huff has 2 pieces from this set on his Spanish piano album. This one and the Invocación that opens the work. Goerner has his own approach, though. In spite of the pedal blurring the bass notes, all of the attack can be heard on this excellent recording, which picks up a lot of detail. But that, of course, is Goerner's playing, too. He gets a big treble splash out of the ending, and again, we get that loud, firm attack. Track 7, El Albaicín. This has a staccato. This is now book 3 of the 4 books. Staccato rhythmic ostinato opening to this. The thematic material builds gradually. I like that Goerner manages to separate the strands of thematic material both harmonically and melodically. By 1 minute and 20 seconds in track 7, we're already in a song-like rhapsodic section. Again, the Spanish elements of the phrase shapes are well articulated. Goerner draws out a lot of elements in the score that make it seem unfamiliar, though I've heard this piece many times. It's just interesting how easily he makes this seem fresh. Really gorgeous pianissimi as throughout the interpretation. On the song-like sections, contrasts are all fully realized in this particular piece. Track 8, El Polo. This is given a quiet, meditative opening with light Spanish melodic spicing. Lots of staccato is used to bring out the rhythm. The main rhythm kicks in the second minute. It's full of slight pauses, and Goerner chisels this rhythm out with his strong, clean tone and slight rubato at the beginning of the phrases. By 3 minutes and 51 seconds, the piece has picked up a lot of momentum. It dissipates a bit as the piece gradually becomes quieter. There's a nice dancing approach to the ending chord. Track 9, Lavapié. Some odd harmony in this lightly dancing theme, which Goerner relishes. He's forte in the repeat, keeping the bass anchoring the constantly moving right-hand figures. We get a new section at around 1 minute and 30 seconds with a heavily outlined rhythmic figure, first played in repeated notes. Goerner comes crashing down appealingly on accented beats, keeping a sense of the passionate rhythm as flurries of scalar figures pass in ghostly fashion in the background. Again, Goerner has a good sense of pulse and manages to keep the rhythm moving, despite the sudden changes of pulse in the presence of broken-up phrases. There's a dramatic approach to the end, complete with serious dissonances, made fully audible, which reduce to quiet wisps of dance-like melody, and 2 emphatic ending chords. All right, we get into Book 4, the last book, the last 3 pieces. First one is Malaga, track 10. If you listen to this album straight through, as I mentioned, the rhythms can be kind of samey. This one starts with the Spanish rhythm familiar from earlier parts of the suite. By 2 minutes and 30 seconds, we're hearing the circling rhythm powerfully gain momentum with its forte sound. It quietens in the 3rd minute, and again we hear the melody played in the piano's mid-range in the left hand, while the right plays high, sometimes dissonant accompaniment. And there's a big ending on this one. And Goerner really makes it big, too. Track 11, Jerez. Contrast at last. This starts quietly and modestly, and I believe Goerner is playing this without using the una corda pedal to achieve the quiet effect. There's no real muted effect. He's just playing it this quietly. It's quite a technique. The volume builds in the 3rd minute, after which we get a new theme softly stated in the 3rd minute, beautifully realized with a sensitive sense of the Spanish elements of the melody, as has been the case for Goerner throughout. There are some really gorgeous chord changes in this work, especially in the 5th minute, which Goerner highlights with subtle changes of attack and slight pauses when they occur. Heavy accents in the 7th minute highlight the Spanish rhythm. The heavy loudness to delicate quiet that Goerner achieves in this and throughout the album, again, is notable for making this set so appealing. There's a tranquil approach to the atmospheric yet rhythmically chiseled ending. And the last track, Eritania, track 12. Brief ending at 5 minutes and 22 seconds to Book 4. Highly rhythmic and dance-like, gaining momentum and volume as it goes. As throughout, the Spanish flavor of the rhythm and melody are expertly brought out by Goerner. I also love how he does a small rallentando just before new sections start, before moving at full speed into the next section. Rallentando is like a slowing down. There's a fantastic build-up of momentum to the end of the piece and of the entire suite. Thoroughly satisfying, fantastic rhythmic momentum throughout. I really love this set of pieces, no matter who's playing it. The rhythms just make me happy immediately, and there's a lot of detail in this. This recording is one of the better ones I've heard. In fact, it's probably the best one besides Alicia De La Rocha's early 1980s recording. Goerner captures the Spanish flavor of the pieces and brings out all voices despite the virtuosity required. Form and rhythm are all beautifully realized. Absolutely hear the De La Rocha recording if you haven't heard it. This is a set to hear, though. And again, I'll also recommend Stephen Huff's Spanish album, where he plays 2 of these, sort of in the spirit of De La Rocha. This is a little different than De La Rocha, though, so it's a good way to rediscover these pieces. And if you like them, and if you like Spanish rhythms, absolutely hear this.
Yeah, it's unique pieces for sure. I mean, there's a content of the compositions. They're really like histrionic, going crazy. Sometimes they get dreamy, and they're always changing without any warning, keeping you on your toes. But they're really fun to listen to. the performance is really fine. He brings out all the contrasts in the tempos and real attention to dynamics. All the subtle shades are there, and a great sounding recording too. As you said, they can be a little bit too much of a good thing. So
because it's long, it'll take 80 minutes to get through the whole set. Yeah,
listen to one set, one book at a time.
That's three. They usually do them in threes in those days. Yeah, so.
And I broke it up over 2 days, and but I really enjoyed it. Very exciting, passionate compositions.
Right. I think the thing you said about the contrast, he really does a lot to bring that out. Whereas De La Rocha has more of she kind of makes them a little more uniform sounding of a piece. So I think that's a feature of this set. So if you want to hear something, a little different version of that, this would be a good recording to hear. Okay, and third in the classical music, we have a bit of an adventure. It's an album called Le Monde, Selon, George Antheil. The artists are Patricia Kopatchinskaja on violin and Joonas Ahonen on piano. This is on the Alpha label as well. All right, I wanted to say something. Patricia Kopatchinskaja, I have loved this violinist. She's Moldavian. Since I heard her play the Bartók Violin Concerto No. 2 and the Ligeti Violin Concerto, two works that I really love. They're really adventurous and exciting, and she gave these just magnetic performances of those two. She then released an album of Prokofiev's Violin Concerto No. 2 and the Stravinsky Violin Concerto, and I was hooked and listening to everything she did. Now, when we started this podcast, right on episode 2, we did one of her albums. She's a very adventurous performer and programmer as well. The album we heard on episode 2 was called Plaisir Illuminé, and we didn't like it because it was really weird.
Yeah.
I liked bits of it, but the entire program was a little too much. Then we heard her do Pierrot Lunaire by Schoenberg, where she actually sang the solo part, and I thought that was a little histrionic too. We both did. And then we heard her play with Sol Gabetta on an album called Sol and Pat. We rather liked that one, and noticed that it was adventurous as well. That had the Ravel duo for violin and cello on it, which I really love. So this came out. And I have to keep trying because I like her playing. This album it's called The World According to George Antheil, and it tries to capture Antheil's vision of the world through music. There's only one George Antheil work on the album. There's also a Beethoven piano sonata. Not piano sonata, violin sonata too. It fills out the program with composers like Beethoven that Antheil admired, and others, Morton Feldman and John Cage, who he knew and admired him. So it's a picture of his world, really. The album cover is kind of cute. It features a black and white photo of Ahonen and Kopatchinskaja in a World War I era biplane, decked out in pilot goggles and headgear. Ahonen is in the front seat, looking dashing, with Kopatchinskaja behind, looking rather cute and diminutive in her leather helmet. The album cover catches the feel of Antheil's peak period, which was the 1920s, the roaring 20s. Think The Great Gatsby, Prohibition, all of this. Now, Antheil was in Paris during all this time, so he was drinking mightily, I'm sure. The booklet notes for this album are very interesting. So if you get your hands on the CD, I absolutely advise you to give them a read through, as was Antheil himself. Antheil, by the way, was American, I should mention. In fact, all of the composers on this recording, except Beethoven, are Americans. So it's really an American recording, even though the title is French. The French title is indicating his time in Paris. I think he even studied with Nadia Boulanger. I'm not really sure about that. Let me give you a sample of the booklet here. Antheil advertised himself as a pianist futurist. The futurists they started in Italy, and they praised speed, youth, danger, violence, the industrial city, and the miracles of technology. It really sounds like rock and roll. It inspired many innovations in the arts, as well as the living dangerously of Mussolini's fascism. Now, Antheil himself was never a fascist, but his friend Ezra Pound was. I mean, as people probably know. Antheil was never a fascist, but many Italian futurists, and Ezra Pound too, were. Antheil did like the whole sped-up world that futurists praised, and it shows in his machine-like aggressive music. Boy, if Antheil were alive today, he would be the only person on planet Earth that loves the world we live in now. Because everything is like super fast now. He thought of a pianist's fingers as both his ammunition and his machine guns. Okay. I think you already know what you're in store for. Kind of. This is not going to be gentle ballads on this album. All right. Antheil's piano works often caused riots. So once in Budapest, he asked for the doors to be locked for the second half, which was the half that he was playing his music in. He then took out a loaded Chicago gangster-style .32 automatic Colt revolver from its silken holster under his left armpit and laid it on the piano. Respectful silence and attention were thus imposed. No riot at that concert. This is even better. Even Alberto Narcisi in my novel, Extreme Music, doesn't get up to antics like this. I really should have read this first. Incidentally, I've mentioned on this podcast before that if you ever want to read an autobiography of a composer, the best one ever is by Hector Berlioz, because he's just such a character. He's really honest about himself, and he's also rather full of himself, which is entertaining to read about, if not to be around. Antheil, however, wrote the second most entertaining autobiography ever by a composer. His autobiography is called Bad Boy of Music, and it is highly recommended reading. Antheil is a great writer, okay, and he writes well about himself. Musicologists often complain about this. There are factual errors in the book, but, you know, you can do your research if you want to find out what those are. He was a compelling writer, though. All right, let's get to this program, which is, it's not just an adventurous program, but as we'll see when we get to the Beethoven, they're adventurous performances as well. The first track, it's very short, by Morton Feldman, American composer, called Piece for Violin and Piano, written in 1950. Now, Antheil appreciated Feldman's work, and John Cage introduced Feldman to Antheil's music. This is a very brief work, just under 2 minutes long, and it plays on silence, as especially Morton Feldman's later music in the 80s. He did 4-hour works that were just like gentle chords, you know, with loads of silence in between. This work is very spare, so much that one notices each note and where it's placed in the temporal field. I kind of feel like when I hear this work, like you're looking at, say, a football field, and you're seeing, like, if you can imagine sound as objects, they're just placed in random places. You know, on the field.
That's what I wrote, random tones, yes.
Yeah, it's a bit like Webern, really. This reminded me a bit of Webern, but Webern had the 12-tone system that he was using. All right, next we get up to Beethoven, Violin Sonata number 7, Opus 30 number 2, written in 1802. Okay, so now, let me just say right away, this is not an interpretation that you're going to want to just go to just to hear a violin sonata. This has been interpreted to fit into this program, into Antheil's bad boy sort of image, his self-defined bad boy image. Beethoven is on this album because he was Antheil's lifelong hero, and I got to read this too. This is what you're missing by not reading Bad Boy of Music. In the book, Antheil described the Beethoven sonata, not this one, but a different one. It doesn't say which one. Like this. He said, "The first theme, a noble theme it is, as noble as a man's true love, the woman he marries. Now comes the second theme, in the dominant key." So this is going to be in, if you're in C major, this would be in G major, right? In the dominant, a brighter key. It is the mistress. Sounds like an Italian wrote this. The mistress always comes a little while after the wife, and she is in a brighter key. Don't worry, though, for the mistress theme will be as dull as the wife's in the recapitulation, in the same key. Isn't that like life? And here's the development. Here is where the wife gets to know about the mistress and raises hell. Here they are together. Left hand is the wife, right hand the mistress. They call it counterpoint. I call it a cat fight. What a wonderful master Beethoven is. Those are George Antheil's words. I wish he was my music teacher. Anyway, I shall have to keep this in mind next time I listen to Beethoven sonatas. Okay, so this first movement of the Violin Sonata number 7 is labeled Allegro con brio. It's played rapidly, and Kopatchinskaja's articulation of the opening melody is highly contrasted in volume, much more than you'd normally hear in a more straightforward performance of this work, with the first held note almost disappearing and the forte sawed out of the instrument. It's kind of an ugly tone, and intentionally so. That's going to set the scene for the whole movement, and really the whole sonata. Kopatchinskaja has always got a unique take, and here she's providing high contrast. It's interesting, but it's more for the program on this album rather than an interpretation of the sonata that you'd return to. So really, this should be heard, when you listen to this, you should hear it in the context of this particular album. The tempo is pretty fast, as I said. Kopatchinskaja's phrasing is, let's say, inventive. This is a performance that makes you sit up and take notice, though, mostly because of the oddities of tone and phrasing that Kopatchinskaja conjures. That's not to say it's bad, it's actually very compelling, but rather removed from traditional approaches, which is in keeping with Antheil's whole vibe. I bet this would be interpreted differently by this ensemble if it were on an all-Beethoven album. I think the interpretation was made to suit the spirit of this particular album. It's playful and iconoclastic. Ahonen plays the piano part fairly straight, though. It's Kopatchinskaja that's got all the oddities of tone and line. Although Ahonen is playing very fast. Second movement, Adagio cantabile. This starts out as a straight and really lovely reading of the movement, with Kopatchinskaja delivering a gorgeous vibrato in her line. The piano is rather free with his phrasing, taking certain lines staccato. There are a few dynamic surprises from Kopatchinskaja, but all in all, this is fairly straightforward, at least more so than the first movement. Kopatchinskaja and Ahonen do manage to pull out some surprises in attack and contrast throughout the movement, though, making their attacks suddenly quick and sharp-edged, then soft and tentative. They make this movement a study in contrast. I liked Kopatchinskaja's almost inaudible pizzicati just before the final cadence of the movement. Third movement, scherzo, allegro, and trio. This has an awkward rhythm that begins the movement, with Ahonen leaning into its idiosyncrasies. Kopatchinskaja ups the ante with off-kilter quick crescendos that make the violin lines sound neurotic. This is quite an experience. The fourth movement, finale, allegro, very fast, fairly straightforward, with some elements played more emphatically than usual, especially in the piano. There's some nice contrast in the lower theme at 1 minute and 45 seconds or so. Oh, sorry, the slower theme at 1 minute and 45 seconds, or around that point. The movement comes across as manic, with some breathers in the quieter sections. Kopatchinskaja will manipulate her sound at times in ways that make the listener sit up. At 4 minutes and 8 seconds, the piano adds a hesitancy to his chords. There are all kinds of subtle manipulations of tone and rhythm in the movement by the soloists. I'd urge you to hear this version of this sonata, if only to understand that a piece need not sound like its standard versions do. So I often get people saying, well, if you hear say, for example, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, that's it. You've heard it. Like every different orchestra around the world is going to play it, and it'll sound like that. But if you listen to a lot of recordings, you'll notice pretty quickly that's not the case. There are different tempos, different details that are brought out. You're hearing all the same notes, but there's a lot of room for interpretation in a composed, written-down work. All right, John Cage is the composer on track 6, his Nocturne for Violin and Piano from 1947. Cage really liked Antheil's work and introduced it to Morton Feldman. And this work features a lot of piano arpeggios sustained by the sustain pedal, with the violin exploring some varieties of sound like sul ponticello or long, sustained, quiet high notes. It's a spacious work like the first Feldman we heard, but with more detail. Not terribly relaxing, but highly listenable. It's actually one of the less unusual of Cage's pieces, because he really got into some wild stuff. All right, finally, the man of the hour, George Antheil. We hear his Sonata No. 1 for violin and piano from 1923. Think about that. Really appreciating this work is going to require us to kind of put our heads back into the 1920s, because Antheil is using a lot of mechanical rhythms in this, and they're really harsh, like mechanical rhythms. Now, we live in this digital age now, and where things don't really sound like this anymore, so we're not going to respond to this the same way that audiences would have at that time by punching each other and throwing chairs. What did it say earlier? If there was a performance in France in the 1920s that didn't erupt into a riot, the performance was considered to not be successful. you had to bring your boxing gloves to those theaters back then. Anyway, the outer movements of this work consist of percussive and repetitive machine music with allusions to Satie, earlier works by Antheil, and Stravinsky. The piece was written for the violinist Olga Rudge, who was poet Ezra Pound's lifelong love. Antheil and Rudge performed this and the second sonata, which is not on this album, frequently and always to sold-out houses and with success de scandale. Okay. It says here, a concert did not cause a scandal in Paris at that time, was considered a failure. Well, George Antheil was one of the more successful composers of the period, given that standard. This piece has a rustic kind of mechanical rhythm in the first movement, played at mid-tempo. At 1 minute and 30 seconds, the piano plays a manic repeating high note, while the violin plays a neurotic ostinato line. The mechanicalness remains and is very direct here. The piece keeps suddenly changing from one section to the next, and it's always chugging, but at different speeds. Remember also, when you listen to this, we're in the cinema age, so cinema is a new thing, and this was a silent movie era, where sudden cuts were used, and that technique was applied to music in the early 20th century as well, instead of, say, modulating to another key like Beethoven would have done. And everybody else in the Romantic era. Now we're just kind of, it's like a splice in a film. We're just moving into a new key with no warning. And this was acceptable to audiences because of cinema. There's a lot of maniacal repetition throughout the work. A lot of it can be thought of as repetitive factory machinery sounds. It's adventurous sonically, but enjoyable for those with a sense of humor. After the 7th minute, it sounds like a machinery we've been listening to is breaking down as the rhythm lurches forward, while Kopatchinskaja throws her tone along with it as though she's being buffeted by the twists and turns of a roller coaster. It's a clever interpretation, so she's adding that to this, and I really liked it. It was clever. It ends suddenly and rather unexpectedly with an odd upward violin note. Movement 2, which is labeled simply Movement 2. And they're all labeled like that. Movement 2, Movement 3, Movement 4. This is one of the two inner movements are more tranquil, and they contain Arabic elements, and in Antheil's words, all the strangeness of Africa. Now, Africa was sort of still a fairly unknown place at this time. Only traders used to go there, and since the world was sort of starting to open up a bit, just African goods were starting to come into Europe, and I guess it really intrigued people. Anyway, contrast with the first movement, Kopatchinskaja's line and her delivery of it is eerie. The piano chimes a bell-like rhythm while we hear Kopatchinskaja play exaggerated portamentos in her melody that give the music a sour, past its sell-by date quality. She continues this throughout as the piano keeps up its bell-like chord quality. Movement 3, track 9. The piano plays granitic chords while the violin plays long, sustained notes that swoop from note to note. Sort of I guess you could call that a portamento type of effect. It's very slow. The piano chords suddenly amplify at about 1 minute and 20 seconds, and the violin comes in for some loud playing. Piano chords become a bit more Debussyan at 2 minutes and 20 seconds as the violin continuously hits a note by tapping her bow repeatedly on the string. The theme at 3 minutes starts slowly and gradually speeds up, with the piano playing lovely crystalline chords in its higher ends while the violin plays a circling ostinato theme. The movement ends with one more tapped note on the violin. It's kind of an interesting sound. We hear it a lot in orchestral music, but not so much in chamber music. And then movement 4, back to a quick machine rhythm. Here the piano is playing a repeated chord, and this really moves. The violin pretty much plays the same repeated chord. The movement features shifting and sometimes abruptly changing mechanical patterns. The piano's line is pretty intricate, with interweaving mechanical rhythm themes like interlocking gears. It's a pretty harsh-sounding movement, but I have to say I really liked it. It was really unusual and has an iconoclastic quality to it. I especially found Kopatchinskaja's odd, swooping sound at the beginning of the 5th minute over the piano's harsh, dissonant chord to be especially amusing and even funny. It's like a malfunctioning machine. I'm sure it drove audiences crazy in a bad way, in a nerve-wracking way. So you're really not one to listen to before breakfast, but or after work, but maybe in a day when you have a day off, Anyway, track 11, we get one more work, Morton Feldman, Extensions 1 for violin and piano from 1951. Feldman's works were always about space, and they became more and more about space as he got older. Here we get a respite from the aggression of the Antheil, and something resembling sounds placed in a time field, like a football field with time objects on it. This piece is longer at 7 minutes and 31 seconds than the opener, and it's also a bit busier. It has a lot of sort of atonal chords in it, and proceeds along something that's recognizably a rhythm, so each beat seems to get a chord. Sounds are random, as are levels of attack, and it simply ends unexpectedly when there are no more notes left to play. It's not a relaxing piece by any means, but it is relatively quiet. Okay, so if you're a Beethoven fan, this particular album is not for purists. You got to be a bit of an adventurer for this album. I liked it, though, and what I liked about it is that the program and performances are all of a piece. It's almost as though the Antheil piece is the jumping off point for the interpretations of everything else we hear. And they'd all sound kind of odd if they were not heard in the context of the entire program. This is an extreme example of what a good program is supposed to do, compel you musically. The Antheil Sonata is a work that simply isn't heard often enough. It's very enjoyable. Again, you have to kind of put your head into the machine age to really appreciate what it's doing. We generally don't hear industrial noise like this anymore. And it's also rather comically clever in parts. The theme of this album is iconoclasm, and it really puts that across. We can all use a bit of iconoclasm from time to time, so I'm going to say give this a listen and get a sense of the past being destroyed in a way that makes the present seem full of possibility. That's what I think that these iconoclasts were after. I think that would be Antheil's wish.
Well, it's certainly an interesting collection. Like we always say, if you're going to keep recording these Beethoven, Mozart works, you may as well have a new take on it. So this is certainly interesting. Despite the non-traditional performance, I was admiring the tight musicianship and the excellence of their performance, especially with the faster parts. The passage is faster than usual, taking some chances. The performance impressed me. The Feldman pieces don't really do too much for me. I did like the Cage Nocturne. It's a really sparse and mysterious sort of atmosphere that it creates. The Antheil, that's kind of it's really hard to, I guess the machine-like is what, the way you describe it is maybe the closest thing. I wrote about the fourth movement that it sounds as if he's writing for a percussion ensemble sometimes,
Yeah, the piano as a percussion instrument. Yeah. He really hammers home the ideas, though. So sometimes I feel like they go on a bit long with the repetitions of the ideas. But I imagine that, in a live performance, they would really, get the emotions rising. But I think he wasn't really going for composition as much, so really hammering this into the listener's head so they'd go crazy, sort of. It
could be,
sort of erupt.
Yeah. It does have that kind of percussive quality to it. So it's a unique use of the violin sound and technique too. Not really anything else I can say sounded like this piece. Yeah, and then like you say, that it does have an overall theme according to his world. So the other pieces are adapted to that in a kind of Feldman sandwich there too. Yeah, I don't know how a lot of people will feel about this Beethoven.
It's a classical adventure. If you like your music loud and if you like punk rock, you might want to hear this.
Certainly, if your image of classical music is stuffy and Beethoven is always the same, this will destroy those preconceptions. So take a listen. It's an adventurous program.
I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just pull this one out when someone says that. The next time someone says that to me, how could you listen to classical music? It's so stuffy. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, Antheil.
Listen to this.
That's my go-to.
This will be my new go-to for that.
Yeah.
What's the other one? Oh, classical music. I love it. It's so relaxing. That's the other one I get a lot.
You have a lot.
Okay.
A lot of
Let's
choices
relax to this.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be her strategy with these kind of adventurous programs.
Yeah, but especially this one though. But she's what she does want. She's not the kind of violinist or the musician or programmer of concerts to just sort of make you relax. Really, she wants you to be listening, and she's good at drawing your attention too. I think.
Yeah.
Kopatchinskaja. And this is the first time I've heard Ahonen on the piano, and I really liked him too. They're a good duo here. I'm pretty sure it's the first time I've heard him. I mean, he might be on one of the earlier ones, but I'm not sure. On to jazz.
And in the jazz category, we're going to go all Latin this week.
All right.
But I've just got so many Latin music recordings that come out from spring to summertime in all instruments. I could just keep doing. It's going to be hard to stay away from them, actually.
I just played my last Latin card with Albéniz, but
okay.
Well, I'll do what I can.
We'll stuff them into other categories.
I could get some Italian stuff in there. I've got a lot of Italian things still.
Yeah, anyway, as you would expect, the focus is going to be on rhythm with all this Latin music and some interesting choices here. Let's start out with Brazilian drummer Mário Gaiotto. And someone new to me, but I was impressed when I heard this, and it's his own self-release, Cosmopaulista. This came out on August 7th. Gaiotto was a founding member of the group Mandu Sarara, a quintet of jazz and Brazilian instrumental music. Recorded 2 albums with them. He was also a sideman for Antonio Nobrega, a respected artist in Brazilian music. And then he went on to study composition with Professor Claudio Leal Ferreira, who is considered to be one of the best teachers of harmony and arrangement in Brazil. And so on this album, we have him as also the composer of all the tunes. So we got a drummer-composer, which is always interesting to hear drummers take on original compositions. And so here is his debut album as a leader, and we've got a jazz trio. And the concept is to make a portrait of Sao Paulo, one of the world's biggest cities. So the title combines cosmopolitan and Paulista, the people from the state of Sao Paulo. And he wants to encapsulate the concept of migration and immigration with the different groups of people, multiculturalism of the city. So he said, that's why in my songs there are Brazilians, but also Jews, Arabs, Turks, Japanese, Armenians, Moroccans, Europeans, Americans, all living together in peace and without borders. And so he's going to have a lot of different ethnic elements that will come through the tunes, but the focus will be on these tight rhythms and his excellent drum technique. So we've got Gaiotto on drums and the composer of all the pieces, Daniel Greju on piano, and Cidiel Vieira on bass. And he mentions a few things, but especially that he was happy to have Greju as a pianist who could sort of make his concepts happen in this group. And I think that's something interesting that follows through as you listen to the way the piano locks in and has a unique rhythmic concept on these tunes. So let's go through them. We're going to start with Going to Maghreb, which I guess is the Northwest African countries as a region. It begins with a deep woody bass intro from Vieira. Drums and piano join in, locking in with the bass on a straight 6-beat figure. It switches up to a swinging 4 or 8-beat, depending how you feel it, with the piano melody strain, but then it goes back to the straight figure and some more intricate rhythms as it moves along through the melody section. Greju comes up first for a solo that's rhythmic, percussive, sometimes a little bluesy. Gaiotto keeps kind of an 8-beat feel underneath with all kinds of tasty drumming ideas. Vieira's next for a bass solo. He comes out pulsing with rhythmic force and keeps it very intense. After a round of the melody strain, piano and bass bring it down with some synchronized chord backing for a drum solo from Gaiotto. He mixes up the beats, working around the kit and surprising with the timing of his hits that come through the solo. They go around the original head again, and you realize just how tight things are with this trio. Really, really interlocking rhythms. Track 2, Tempora de Machixe. And so the machixe is kind of like a Brazilian tango that originated in Rio de Janeiro in the late 19th century at about the same time as tango was developing in Argentina and Uruguay. It's an intervallic piano intro line that starts things off here. It gets joined by bass and drums in a cross-rhythmic line. Things lock in tightly, and Greiju works a percussive and ornamented funky melody line around the groove. After a minute, it changes up to a light and floating tango-like piano melody section at the same tempo, which Gaiotto paints only light cymbal fills behind. And he adds snare to push it along with Vieira's bass, keeping the pulse underneath. He returns to the original driving section for a time around as a transition into a piano solo from Greiju. He has free-flowing lines, runs, mixed with rhythmic figures that lock in precisely, again, with Gaiotto's grooves. Next, there's a stop time section with bass and piano, leaving space for Gaiotto to do some more soloing, impressing with rapid tom work here. And then bass and left-hand piano lead it back into the main melody section with a line that has a cute little skip in the beat compared to before. Track 3 is Jerusalem. This is an intense intro with the piano centering around a B note, giving a modal feel. Gaiotto is keeping an intense groove. It feels like it's in 11/8.
Wow.
And the minor modal melody comes along in the piano. Listen to the tight locking in of the piano and bass here. Vieira gets an intense bass solo over tight and light drum backing and some chord hits from Greiju, who then returns with some variations on the melody theme into a solo that really impresses with rhythmic dexterity and rapid figures. It works into a section with static piano notes and a descending bass pattern for Gaiotto to solo over, ranging all over the drum kit. It really sounds like he's got more than two arms on this part. They go through the modal theme once more to finish it out. Track 4, Ouro Preto. A very complex ostinato bass line from Vieira starts this one out. The piano left hand joins with the bass, while the right hand chord figures punctuate over Gaiotto's fills. It sounds like it's alternating between 8/8 and 9/8 kind of meters. There's a pretty piano melody and a rhythmic right-hand figures and bass working around it with intricate drumming from Gaiotto. Greiju opens it up for a nice solo with great rhythmic and ringing tones over Vieira. It seems to stay in a more steady 8 beat here. Next, there's a repeating chord vamp section, leaving space for Gaiotto to do some drum work under. Toms and rim hits fly from all angles. They take it through, the melody again, and a fresh-sounding rhythmic ending strain. Track 5, 70 times 7. It's a super tight 8-beat groove on this one, with a locked-in bass and piano left-hand syncopated line for an intro. The piano melody is infectious and slinks against the groove like a snake. It has cool modulation from D minor to F minor along the way. Vieira gets a bass solo. It's full of rhythm and feeling with a great full and intense tone. And Greiju follows with a solo, again mixing blazing runs with super tight rhythmic ideas. An ostinato, bass, and left-hand piano line with melody or with piano chords makes a backdrop for another exposition of complex drum soloing from Gaiotto before they go around the slinking theme again, ending with a rising surprise in the piano. Track 6 is Tambu e Viola. It's a hypnotic 9-beat rhythmic piano riff that repeats over cymbals with bass and left-hand hits at unexpected spots. It builds into a forceful piano line that ends in a hold and resumes with a new happy solo piano rubato melody. It gets more motion with a new groove and super tight drumming from Gaiotto. Greiju then works some rhythmic figures into a solo that really flies and floats over the busy groove. It gets quieter for a solo from Vieira with soft piano chords and cymbals under his pulsing lines. And next, piano and bass trade-off sections with drum soloing before working back into the melody, with Gaiotto working up a storm underneath. Greiju takes it up higher and more delicate for it to unwind peacefully. Track 7 is called Raining. It's a slow, plodding waltz, ostinato bass and piano line to begin. Gaiotto adds rhythmic figures of piano notes and chords above while Gaiotto dances lightly on the cymbals. It alternates with and without the higher piano figures. Eventually, drums and bass drop out for a bit before rejoining for a bass solo over the piano, which keeps the ostinato idea going but higher up. Gaiotto keeps it clicky under Vieira's bass melodies, working in more snare work to bring it up with more piano figures to transition into a solo from Gaiotto that's flowing and ringing. Vieira has a steady plod going underneath, and he continues it as the piano solo transitions to simpler figures from earlier, and it continues with some syncopated variation and a final syncopated end phrase. Track 8, Enquanto voce dormia, while you were sleeping. It's a rhythmic bass line opening. It sounds like it should go under a melody, and it soon does under the cheerful tune played by Gaiotto on piano. There's some syncopated mix-ups along the way here, keeping the rhythm interesting, and Gaiotto accents them. There's some cool unison bass and left-hand piano answering lines to the melody too. And the middle has a solo piano section where Gaiotto runs both lines by himself. This is a short piece, only 3.5 minutes or so, so they wrap it up with the melody again quickly. It's light and a lot of fun. 9, a nice title, Armenian Jazzy Metal. It's a mixed meter, beginning with a unison descending modal piano and bass line. It moves into a heavy and menacing section built around a low D on the piano with little syncopated diversions that return to the pitch. Then there's a lifting piano solo section that contrasts with some different harmonic ideas. It returns to the heavy section, adds the piano idea on top. Next, an excited and rhythmic piano part is added for a bit before Gaiotto gets to run off on a solo that explores some interesting harmonic ideas with runs before becoming more rhythmic. So a different groove and more piano figures transform the heavy idea into some backing figures of bass and piano for soloing by Gaiotto. And finally, there's another rhythmic piano section into an outro of the modal bass and piano theme from the beginning. And the final track, Meracapiba. It's a rhythmic piano melody line. It starts it out with heavy stop-time hits of drums and bass. It repeats, and Gaiotto adds snare and then more drum figures to fuel it. Gaiotto gets melodic variations going, some chiming chords before he gets to a solo. Gaiotto has a chugging groove going on underneath with tight snare work. Vieira takes a bass solo next with tight rhythmic lines. It goes through stop-time hits of piano and drums. A slower chiming piano section over cymbals changes the feel completely before it's off on a new infectious groove of bass and drums with the fun high-register melody figures from Gaiotto, and they have some exciting rhythmic play with it to the end. So it's an exciting recording, focusing on Latin rhythms, of course, tricky meters, really intricate drum work. There's a variety of melodic and modal ideas mixed in the tunes, reflecting the ethnic influences. The interplay is incredibly tight. Your ear is constantly drawn to Gaiotto's interesting drum work throughout, but Gaiotto impresses with his own sense of rhythm and exciting solos. Vieira's bass sound is strong and deep, sometimes keeping the pulse and other times syncing up with piano or drums seamlessly. His solos have a lot of drive in the bass too. So if you like Brazilian rhythms, you love this album, must listen for all drummers. This guy can really do some different meters and subdivisions and keeping things super tight.
Yeah, I want to say first of all about this album, it's really well produced. I liked the way it sounded. There's production on it, but not so much that it doesn't sound like a live performance in a room. This is an example of like a kind of production on a jazz album that I like. I think this is good. The drums have several mics on them, and they blur the boundary between the way jazz and rock drums are mic'd. You can kind of hear each right. Drum kind of like in its own, it has its own sound. It appealed to me. I like the drums' presence on this recording, and I like the whole album. All of the tracks begins really interesting the way they'll build. They'll start with a short ostinato pattern. So again, this kind of reminds me of rock and roll. You'll have some like repeating pattern, and then like the theme will come in, and then the solos will start from that. The whole album felt good to me. I especially liked, track 7, Raining, which I thought was the patterns that were just sort of overlaid in that track were really interesting. And there was kind of this sense of like just this sprinkling rain to it that I thought was really inventive. I liked it a lot. And also track 8, Enquanto Você Dormia, was really pretty, very sunny, and a great contrast to the previous track, Raining, too. Yeah. So those were the two standout tracks for me. Yeah, at least the ones that I just kind of really caught my ear. I like the way the ostinato pattern is built into something bigger. From small things, great things are made. I'd love to have this on a CD, but couldn't find one. Please release one.
Well, write to him and see what the plans are here. This just came out.
I'd buy this one, I think.
Yeah.
if it was on a CD. Anyway.
Yeah, great drumming. All right. Further on the Latin train, we're going to get to Mr. Brian Lynch and Spheres of Influence with his new recording, Songbook Volume 2, Dance the Way You, that's the letter U, Want to. And this is on
Prince used to write it.
Holistic Music Works, came out August 12th. Now, Brian Lynch has got quite a resume in the world of jazz. He was a member of the Horace Silver Quintet back in the early 80s. Also the Toshiko Akiyoshi Jazz Orchestra in the 80s as well. And then he was also working at the same time with Latin music and salsa band leader Angel Canales, 82 to 83, and the great Hector Lavoe, 83 to 87. So he has a really big Latin background. Also, Eddie Palmieri in 1987.
Wow.
And in 1988, he joined what would, I guess, become the final sort of version of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And then after that, he joined up with Phil Woods in 1992, kind of taking over Tom Harrell's chair with that group. And Tom Harrell played with them from 83 to 89. And he also did some work with Benny Golson. And among his many other independent works as a leader, he's got a lot of Latin releases in recent years that we've been fond of. The fabulous Modera Latino, Latin jazz interpretation on the music of Woody Shaw. I think that's a double album, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Yeah.
If you love Woody Shaw's music and then just add all these Latin rhythms to everything and monster players, that's great. That was 2016. And 2019, the Omni American Book Club, Brian Lynch Big Band, this got the Grammy Award for Best Large Jazz Ensemble. Yeah. And then last year, we covered on episode 36 of the podcast 2021's Songbook Volume 1, Bus Stop Serenade. And we enjoyed that a lot. And so here's the follow-up. Dance the Way You Want To, this is in Lynch's words, continues my songbook project of reclaiming my original compositions recorded on various labels for my own Holistic Music Works imprint. After the success of Volume 1, Bus Stop Serenade, named on the top 40 albums of 2021 by Jazz Times Magazine, Dance the Way You Want To continues the journey through my past catalog by exploring the Latin jazz side of my work in fresh versions of material written over more than 3 decades. In addition, 2 new compositions make their debut on this album, EP's Plan B for Eddie Palmieri and The Disco Godfather. So this is for pioneering black comedian filmmaker Rudy Ray Moore. And so here we've got, of course, Brian Lynch on trumpet, Tom Kelly on alto sax on some tracks, Aldo Savant on tenor sax, Chris Thompson Taylor also on tenor sax on some tracks. I'll point those out as we go along. 2 pianists, Kemuel Roig and also Alex Brown. Then we've got Rodner Padilla on electric bass, Hilario Bell on drums, and Murphy Aucamp on percussion. So we start this recording out with EP's Plan B. As we just learned, it's for Eddie Palmieri. This one starts with a deep and funky electric bass line and some woodblock, I think, in there. Conga beats bring in piano and drums on a Latin vamp. Then Lynch and Salvant enter with a unison horn line that snakes around minor modal ideas with precision. It gets more uplifting and Latin sounding towards the end with some cowbell added below it. There's a break, and then back to the bass intro into a trumpet solo from Lynch, who somehow manages to keep a really relaxed feel while making it really rhythmic with syncopated interval ideas and a laser-like tone when he gets up into the higher register. Salvin follows on a tenor solo. spacing out his phrases to get started. His phrasing's smooth and his sound is restrained even when he's playing faster and forcefully. Next, it's time for some deep and funky bass in a solo from Padilla. Alex Brown follows on a piano solo. He has some engaging harmonic ideas, gets percussive with some chiming Latin lines and crashing chords. The horns come back with a melody line to transition into a Latin breakdown with nice piano from Brown and the percussion getting to have some fun. The horns come back with another tight line on top for a bit and a final build up to the last blast. And it's a high energy tune to get things started on this recording. Track 2 is Change of Plan, and this is a change of pace compared to the first tune with a medium slow Latin groove here. Camille Roig plays a pretty piano intro over light drumming and congas. A little bass and left-hand piano line lead into Lynch taking the melody on trumpet. Saxes come in on backing lines and then join in to harmonize with him. It's a slow groove, but with an accented push in the horn lines and bass. After a little interlude, Padilla gets another fleet-fingered and smooth bass solo. Tom Kelly's next with an uplifting alto solo with some double-time lines, and then Lynch follows. His solo gains more excitement as he goes on with smooth, fast lines, nice articulated phrases. Chris Thompson-Taylor follows on tenor sax, digging low with some phrases, keeping the intensity going. And Roig on piano is next. A lot of high-energy lines in a short solo. And Lynch brings back the melody for another round, and the saxes join in backing, Roig adding some cool punctuated piano accents between phrases. Track 3 is Across the Bridge. A drum hit and a cool syncopated bass and left-hand piano get it going. Kelly joins in the line on alto. Lynch adds another line on top of that, which counters until the sax and trumpet join and the bass goes its own way. There's a lot of syncopated fun going on here. The horns stay together for another section. The bass line transitions into a solo from Lynch. He starts out with some rhythmically spaced out phrases and moves into more connected ideas that keep pushing upward. The percussion and piano kick it up underneath, pushing him along as well. And Padilla is doing great bass work underneath everything too. Kelly's next on alto, getting intense with some high register notes and rhythmic accents. Brown follows up with a piano solo before it's back to the bass and left-hand line, repeating for some extended percussion jamming until Lynch and Kelly return with the melody line. Then we've got the title track, number 4, Dance the Way You Want To. Roy gives an 8-bar piano intro over the straight clicky drum beat and bass. It's nice and bluesy and sets the feel for Lynch and Taylor to come in with the bluesy unison horn line that splits into harmony. A little cowbell underneath sounds good as well. Seems to be an AABA form. The B section contrasts nicely in the horn lines and chords, and the groove changes up too. I like the anticipation in this B section with the early phrase. It starts on the 4th beat of the 4th measure rather than on the 5th or on the 5th measure. So it sort of pulls you in early. Taylor gets a tenor solo first here. He plays sassy lines, leaving good space in between as well. Lynch has a longer solo here, and it's really impressive how he works this complex ideas perfectly through the chord changes with agility. I mean, he did write these tunes, but his sort of precision of hitting all the harmonies with these agile phrases really impressed me. There's a few bluesy phrases in his solo too, but he adds in what sounds to me like a Woody Shaw-inspired interval phrase that you don't hear too often in other players. I mean, Woody Shaw had a really unique concept using intervals like fourths and things. It's a great solo. Roig has a piano solo next, having fun with some repeated notes and surprising hits of momentary dissonance and a kind of Chucho Valdez-like exploding line. Next, the horns trade off solo phrases with the percussion before another run through the melody with a couple repeats of the last phrase, Lynch going up high on the fast one so that he can take a final fall on the ending. Then we get that disco Godfather for track 5. Lynch and Solvent on tenor started out with independent, robotic-sounding, interlocking rhythmic horn lines. The rhythm section enters with the bass adding more complexity to the rhythm. It seems, I don't know what, maybe 9/4 time signature. Really hard to count it out. It's complex and fun horn arrangement. The horns trading off solo lines and spots as they go around. There's a contrasting calmer and lyrical section with the horns together on phrasing, and it feels like it goes back into 4/4 or some kind of 8-bar phrasing. It gets more intense again with a driving rhythm underneath. Lynch solos first over the complex groove that changes up feel as he goes along. Then Solvent is next, navigating the tricky rhythmic hurdles with smooth phrases. Alex Brown follows on piano, where the drums and bass lighten up for the start of his solo, and he weaves smooth lines. Percussion and bass groove on a bit, and Brown adds some intense rhythmic piano lines on top. The horns return and take it through the challenging tune again. Try to wrap your head around all the rhythms and meters in this tune. It's really complex, but a lot of fun. Track 6, Tom Harrell. That's the name of the tune. An ode to him. Yeah. It's a very cool electric bass ostinato pattern. Starts this one out with percussion, and the piano doubles with left hand and added chords as the rest of the rhythm section joins in. Lynch and Taylor come in on the melody horn lines, evoking some Tom Harrell-esque melody figures. It's a fun arrangement in 32-bar form. The last section has a more pronounced Latin feel to it. They go around everything twice. It gets a little lighter for a piano solo by Roig next, impressing with fleet fingers on runs and chiming rhythmic notes. Lynch is next on an enthusiastic solo with a few nods to Tom Harrell in his licks. Taylor follows on tenor with smooth blazing lines and rhythmic figures in his solo. The percussion gets some jamming fun next over that groovy bass ostinato, and Roig adds chiming piano on top. The horns add another new line to build it up back into a final run through the melody, after which Lynch and Taylor trade off solo lines and then join on some riffs over piano and a final lick from Lynch to end it. By the way, Tom Harrell himself, who's a great composer, and we heard just a couple weeks ago, he's done a lot of compositions with Latin rhythms, but check out his 1998 recording of The Art of Rhythm. It's a full exposition on all different Latin rhythms with really lovely instrumentation too. Track 7, Silent Conversation. It's a gentler tune with lilting horn lines. Lynch starts and gets answers from Kelly on alto sax. It seems to be in a 9/8 meter. Kelly weaves around Lynch as the melody floats easily, and Kelly also solos first, sounding smooth and free over the unhurried groove. Lynch is lyrical as well, but has some fun with the rhythms in his phrasing. Roig has a gentle piano solo showing off his touch with high register ideas to end. The horns return with a new line that builds up the intensity again into some interesting rhythmic phrases of anticipation into the melody line and a smooth ending. Track 8, Que Seria la Vida. A gentle ballad with a delicate piano intro from Roig. Lynch takes the melody, showing his clear tone and phrasing, adding vibrato in just the right few spots. The melody builds up to a lovely high tone for a climax before settling down. Then Lynch continues on directly into an improvised solo. He keeps it gentle, impressing with the rhythms in his phrasing and note choices. He ends with the phrase that Roig emulates to start his piano solo. And he's more animated in his style, but keeps it graceful with smooth runs and lightly chiming notes. Lynch returns, working into the lifting section of the melody. He gets a solo cadenza, tracing the harmonies, adding an unexpected high exclamation, and making a final soft but firm ending phrase. Very nice, gentle tune. Track 9, Awe Shocks. A complex weaving bass and left-hand piano line get this one going with syncopated piano chord and drum hits. The horns lay a complex line on top of that, and the rhythms are popping from all corners of this song. There's a contrasting, more flowing horn line section, and then the bass locks into the horn phrase at the end for a cool effect. The original bass line goes around into a bass solo from Padilla. He's funky and fluid with a great rounded attack on the notes. Brown follows with the piano solo, full of inventive rhythmic ideas. Taylor is next on tenor sax, and boy, he always sounds smooth, but he has fast phrases that really lock into the rhythms. Kelly solos on alto next, also with intensity, and then Lynch wraps up the solos with an exciting one, pushing to the end with rhythmic phrases into the upper register. Brown vamps out with the bass for the percussion to beat out some tight and heavy soloing till the horns burst back in with the melody and a line that keeps building tension to the last note. In track 10, we get alternate take of Tom Harrell. As far as the arrangement, it's the same tempo and feel. What you do get is different solos. Particularly, Lynch has some cool lines with different building interval ideas here. And then I noticed that the piano is also quite different over the percussion jam section. He doesn't get up into that high chiming as much, which was cool in the earlier takes. So it's worth checking out for the differences. So as with Volume 1, Lynch gives us another great collection of his original tunes. It's like an hour and 20 minutes. It's a long recording. They're engaging Latin rhythms throughout. The horn lines keep you amazed with the creative directions and rhythms that they take you through. The solos are inspired all around. Lynch sounds powerful, confident on trumpet, great tone, really skillful solos. A must listen for all trumpet and Latin jazz fans.
Yeah, and I should have chimed in around track 9. Aw Shocks was was the standout track for me. It had some really genuinely exciting moments in it, especially towards the end of that track. The whole album had exciting moments, but track 9 towards the end, Aw Shocks, has some great stuff. It really picked up my energy. It's good. I've heard quite a bit of Brian Lynch over the last few years and really like his really bright sound. And most of this record sounded like a fun party to be at, like a fun jazz party. The solo track sounded like the party's aftermath. Anyway, it was a good time. I really enjoyed this album a lot. It was really uplifting. Well, not uplifting in a spiritual way, but uplifting in a energy way, let's say. Yeah,
I'm amazed at the horn lines, the melody lines that he writes. They're really complex and they go on and on. You're not going to hear the same thing over and over, in his compositions. That really intricate, and all the lines and sections build on each other, become really exciting. And with these Latin grooves, it's really a lot of fun to listen to. All right, and wrapping up the Latin selections for this evening, we've got one that just came out on Friday.
Yeah, we actually got to hear this one before its release date, didn't we?
We did, and that's thanks to Anne Braithwaite. Thanks for getting us a copy of this to start listening to early. That helped out a lot. And we're talking about Miguel Zenón's new Música de Las Américas.
Yeah, who I should mention we're both fans of. This is another artist that I'd really listen to anything that he records. I have quite a few of his albums.
Yeah, this is on his label Miguel Music. Yeah. And, well... he's Zenón, if you don't know, from San Juan, Puerto Rico originally, made his way to the States and onto Berklee College of Music, and graduated from there in 1996, and also attended Manhattan School of Music, continuous studies, and he got a master's degree in performance 2001 before settling in New York City. He's worked with a lot of artists in New York: Charlie Haydn, Fred Hirsch, Kenny Werner, David Sanchez, Daniela Perez, the list goes on. And he's made quite a name for himself. He's worked with Brian Lynch, too, as well, I believe, Joey Calderazzo. But he's won a number of critic polls in jazz and other publications for top artist and top alto sax player, and 9-time Grammy nominee, 6-time for Latin Grammy nominee. So I hope he gets the Grammy, although... our estimation of who wins the Grammys is not not aligning with.
Although I don't know, did he win one recently?
No, I don't think
he's
so.
Always not. He's one of these artists that's always nominated but doesn't seem to win. Yeah. It's a real shame. Yeah, some artists have a lock on it or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Anyway, Miguel, we hope you do win one.
Yeah,
because you deserve it. But we will think any less of.
Well, let's see who else is up there, though. It might be, it depends. I don't know. But yeah, we generally like this artist a lot. Yeah.
The story here is we got the album notes and we got the press release, so lots of extra information that I'll weave into here. So he writes, the music is inspired by the history of the American continent, not only before European colonization, but also by what's happened since, cause and effect, Zenón's explanation. And music grew out of his passion for the history of the American continent, and the resulting album pays tribute to its diverse cultures while also challenging modern assumptions about who and what America is. Interesting concept to start out. So we've got the Miguel Zenón Quartet as the bass here, and also all compositions by Zenón himself. So Zenón on alto saxophone, who we've heard quite a few times on the podcast. Episode 10 with Charlie Sepulveda. This is Latin jazz. Episode 34 with the sort of pandemic online big band, Chad Lefkowitz-Brown and the global big band Open World. And we also heard him on episode 39, Jose Jacobo's Herencia Criolla album. So we've heard his sax quite a few times. We've got Luis Perdomo on piano, who we heard in episode 27 last year, Pete Rodriguez Obstacles recording. And we just heard him in episode 73 on Tom Harrell's Oak Tree. And he impressed us there too.
Yes, so, he's always impressive.
Yeah, we can hear some really good piano on this recording. And let's see, we've got Hans Glauschnick. Maybe just say it all together. Glauschnick on bass. And Henry Cole on drums. Also, we've got some other guest features. We've got Los Planeros de la Cresta, which consists of Emil Martinez, Edwin Hueshin Avies, Joshua Ocasio, Joseph Ocasio, and I don't know how to say this name, Heluis Ocasio, Panderos, which is like a tambourine-like instrument, percussion and vocals on Navegando. One tune here that's I guess they're a plena group, a Puerto Rican street music that's kind of somewhat similar to like Trinidadian calypso and using these handheld drums. We also got Paoli Mejias on percussion on one tune, Opresión y Revolución. Victor Emanueli on Barril de Bomba. It's kind of a traditional Puerto Rican drum on Bambula tune. And Daniel Diaz congas on Antillano. This was recorded in March of last year. And so let's get into it. We've got a little bit of information for each tune before we start. So the first one, Tainos y Caribes. So the notes say, referring to the two major societies who inhabited the Caribbean prior to European colonization and who are the subject of this opening tune, they were the two predominant societies but were very different. The Tainos were a more passive agricultural society while the Caribes were warriors who lived for conquest. This is Zenón's explanation. And so he captures the clashing of the societies in the interlocking rhythms of the piece. So it starts out with a tense rhythmic piano opening by Perdomo. Bass creeps in underneath with a dash of percussion before Zenón comes in on the equally frantic melody. The tension builds over the A section, but things lift up with the changing harmonies of the B section. Tight drumming and percussion underneath, and listen to the battling of the rhythm in the bass and piano under Zenón's racing lines. Perdomo is up first for a piano solo that features fleet-flowing lines with little hesitations to add extra tension. There's some nice interval play and cascading rhythmic figures towards the end of the solo. Zenón returns for a fast unison melody line with Perdomo over the tense bass and drum pulses below, and then piano and sax split off into independent lines, transitioning into Zenón's solo. He's fluid and intense, working into some higher register lines and tricky fingering, but he keeps the melody feel moving throughout to a shrieking climax and an easier dropping final phrase. Drums take over for a bit until Glauschnick gets a one-note bass pulse going. Perdomo adds some cross-rhythmic chords on top. Zenón joins Perdomo in the line, and it builds in intensity to a break. Then Zenón starts another topsy-turvy melody line over Perdomo's chords, but Perdomo joins in unison for the final sprint to the end. All right, we're off to an intense start on this recording. Track 2, Navegando, Las Estrellas nos guían. So the stars guide us, I guess, like navigator. So this is kind of a tribute to the seafaring culture that existed across the region. Zenón's quote, "One thing that blew my mind was how they could travel the sea at long distances just using canoes while being guided by the stars. That opens conversations about what's archaic versus what's advanced in terms of scientific achievement between the New World and Old World."
Yeah, that's something that blows me away, too. Like, I remember reading that Hawaii was settled by people from around Indonesia, around that part of the world. And they just went in these kind of big canoes, and they found Hawaii just by guiding themselves by the stars. Really unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, the album notes say, this composition translates elements from various constellations along the Milky Way and also features the Los Pleneros de la Cresta, the planar group here. And so it's kind of an interesting collection of different sounds. It starts with some sparse long piano chords with a slight syncopation to hint at the rhythm to come. The percussion comes in faintly as Perdomo adds some right-hand figures above the chords. Bass joins in, working together on some of the piano right-hand figures. More percussion adds some suspense to bring in Zenón on the smooth melody line. The percussion continues on until a little break for a bass and left-hand piano line to bring in Zenón on another line with another break. The melody is easy, but the charm is in how Zenón locks in the rhythmic variations with the percussion as it moves along. He connects to a solo, keeping mostly melodic rhythmic phrases, a few bluesy hints, and then ripping into some double-time lines with a gentler ending. Perdomo solos next, rhythmic but flowing too, and then Zenón returns with more smooth melody to a break with a bass and left-hand piano line that leads to a showcase section for the Los Pleneros de la Cresta to add vocals and more percussion. Zenón joins in behind the vocalization for a bit. Then Perdomo brings back the chords from the intro. Zenón joining in with the right-hand figures until just the chords finish it. So it has a nice arc to the composition, lots of things adding in, especially the enjoyable addition of this plena group. Track 3, Opresión y Revolución, Oppression and Revolution. So this is, according to the notes, evokes the tension and release of revolutions on the American continent, notably the Haitian Revolution, among others, featuring the percussion of Paoli Mejias matched with the percussive piano work of Perdomo. The piece also reflects the influence of Haitian voodoo music. Zenón and Perdomo started out, sax and piano working phrases against another piano phrase. Drums kick in, bass joins in a low piano line to a crashing hit. Zenón blows a melody line over hectic rhythms below. And next, alternating rhythmic piano dissonances continue over angry-sounding syncopated bass and percussion working below. This must be the creating the sense of oppression. Zenón returns with a unison line with piano over very busy rhythmic work underneath. A piano chord punctuated percussion interlude leads to Zenón returning for a solo over the busy bass, piano, and percussion rhythms below. The tension and moods change up as he blows on over the dangerous groove. Zenón mixes up his rhythms and phrasing, but still keeps it smooth and connected, culminating in some shrieks and locked-in figures with the percussion. It lightens up for Perdomo to start a solo over some low throbbing bass from Glowacek. The drums keep it light but intense with more percussion from Mejias as Perdomo builds intensity with repeated rhythmic phrases and percussive chords. Zenón returns for a line, and then there's a hypnotic ostinato bass and piano low line for some drum and percussion jamming with tight conga rhythms. And Zenón returns with some final melodic lines that are more uplifting, different in character, so perhaps that's signaling that the revolution has overcome the oppression. Track 4, Imperios. And so Imperios, it says Zenón composed it with the various indigenous empires of America in mind, including the Incas, Mayans, and Aztecs. They were some of the most advanced societies at their time. As a matter of fact, they were in some ways more advanced than what was happening in Europe in terms of contemporary mathematics and astronomy, society, and politics, says Zenón. There was something there already that was really advanced, and it makes me think about what could have been, what would have come out of that. The melody derives from Zenón's transcription of music from a ceremony of Aztec descendants, which is the counterpart to the rhythmic structure of the song. Sets up a big expectation what you're going to hear.
Yeah.
But it's actually quite gentle in character at the start here. So Zenón starts out solo on a relaxed, opening that works intervals that return to a concert G sound. Perdomo joins in with piano chords, and then Cole adds a slow but emphatic drum beat. The bass adds an intervallic line at the end of Zenón's phrase for an interlude until Zenón returns with a new gentle melody line. Things get more rhythmic with syncopated bass and piano figures under Zenón's still smooth phrasing. It eases up for a section before a cool bass and piano line undulates underneath. Cole kicks up the beat into a groove with more motion for Zenón to solo over in more animated fashion. And the bass has cool pulses driving in underneath. Zenón gets speedier lines, but varies his articulation and rhythmic ideas creatively. He works some tense but controlled upper register ideas. Perdomo follows with a piano solo of flowing lines, rhythmic play with staccato intervals. Zenón comes back with a melody line, and the underlying rhythms get busy for a bit, but pull back to only piano and bass, walking in step before Cole joins in again to help them mix it up with rapid syncopated figures, pushing to the end where Zenón and Perdomo join in on a frantic unison line to end it. I like how this song builds from simple elements and all the rhythmic changes that happen along the way. Track 5 is Venas Abiertas. Zenón's compositions on this whole album, Música de Las Américas, reflect the dynamism and complexity of America's indigenous cultures, their encounters with European colonists, and the resulting historical implication. Zenón immersed himself in these topics during the pandemic, reading classics like Eduardo Galeano's Venas Abiertas de América Latina, Open Veins of Latin America, 5 Centuries of the Pillage of a Continent, which details Western exploitation of South America's resources, and another book, Andy Robinson's Gold, Oil, and Avocados, A Recent History of Latin America in 16 Commodities from 2020. It's a modern version showing things haven't changed for the better. So sounds like rather a weighty works that became the inspiration for this tune. Well, this one fades in, unusually, with short ringing piano phrases and drum toms. Bass joins in as Perdomo improvises in short phrases, and Cole works the toms and light cymbals. Zenón joins in on a melody line that Perdomo is also in sync with. There's a piano interlude with some ominous low notes and dissonant chords. On Zenón's next line, a sneaking low bass and piano line wanders menacingly underneath until a smoother section emerges for Zenón to work to the end of the melody. The bass and drums turn busy for Zenón to start a solo. They're throbbing underneath him. Zenón is flying free above, tracing out harmonic ideas with intermittent chord support from Perdomo. He keeps the intensity building into disconnected phrases and then faster rhythmic ideas, repeated notes, some high register torture with ominous bass and piano below. Those rhythmic pulses continue with Zenón reviving from his strangulation to join in softly on top, while Perdomo crashes chords with cymbal hits. The pulses alone are left to end the tune. It's another intense one that has lots of transformations. Track 6, Bambula. This one features the percussion of Victor Emanuele, and the bambula is a dance that was brought over by African slaves to the Americas, developing first in Haiti. Over time, bambula became the rhythm commonly referred to as habanera, which is found in much of Latin American music today. The 3-3-2 rhythm is found in bomba from Puerto Rico and francesa from Cuba. Zenón says it's a thread from New Orleans to Brazil to Central America back to Africa, across all these eras from the past to contemporary pop. For me, I wanted it to feel like you're out at the dance, but at the same time hearing this more modern harmony and melody. Emanuele on Barril de Bomba gets it started with a half-minute or so of solo. The drums join in to kickstart a bass and piano line. Zenón and Perdomo add a higher cross-rhythm melody line on top. Impressive coordination by Perdomo to do these two lines at once. They're really rhythmically in different worlds. After some more of the bass line, they add the top line again, and then the groove slows up to a more flowing and swelling transition section with longer notes from Zenón. It gets busy again with more rhythmic lines and percussion underneath. The bass line transitions to a long section of solo exchanges from Zenón and Perdomo. The tight and intricate percussion rhythms really make their phrasing lock in, and they sound inspired with exciting phrases. Zenón keeps blowing to wrap up the exchanges with a concluding low line as the rhythm comes to a halt. He restarts with a slow, tender line, and Perdomo adds gentle chords. Another short pause, and things get busy again, back to the tempo and groove, with Cole and Emanuele working it under Zenón's lines that build to repeating phrases and that he takes up an octave to an expected big finish, but then he surprises by bringing it down low and quieter for a final softer solo sax ending. Track 7, America el Continente. Zenón returns to a major theme throughout the album, the conception of America not as a country, that is only referring to the modern United States, but as a continent. So America el Continente makes that point clear while reminding listeners of the political implications of the United States assuming ownership of the term America with its subtle erasure of the remaining Western Hemisphere. Okay, so the tune starts out with Perdomo solo. It's got kind of chained legato rising notes of lines of 6 notes, settling the rhythmic 6-beat feel. Bass and light cymbals join in. Zenón comes in, synced with Perdomo's right hand on a melody of spaced-out pairs of notes that work to a section of longer phrases that Perdomo dances around. The bass adds to the movement, and there's a lot going on at once with the various lines. It comes to a big pause that Perdomo builds more rising lines out of for a bass solo. It's a gentle setting with just sparse cymbals. The bass is melodic and longing with clear attack on taut lines into the upper register. The rhythm gets a skip in it, and Perdomo and bass build it over the drums with some fast syncopated hits into a new section for Zenón to solo over. He really bubbles in his sounds over the groove with light drumming below. Cole mixing things up here and there, but keeping it driving along. Zenón continues into a new unison melody line with Perdomo up high on the keys. Piano, bass, and drums crash to an ominous pause. Then Zenón lifts it gracefully out of Perdomo's rising figures. It gets agitated again with the bass and piano left hand, but chills over the rising piano figures for a gentle ending with a short return of the 2-note melody figures from Zenón. Pretty trickles up high by Perdomo. Then we're going to finish it up here with Antillano. Named for the residents of the Antilles, it showcases what Zenón is best known for, bringing together past and present in a forward-thinking, musically satisfying way. Ending the album on an optimistic note, the piece emulates aspects of contemporary dance music while serving as a feature for Daniel Diaz on congas. This was kind of fun because the lighthearted nature of it kind of disguises some complex stuff going on. So conga and drum start to the tune, bringing an infectious, happy piano rhythmic part from Perdomo. Zenón joins in on top with a happy line. If you try counting it, the meter changes are going to surprise and maybe frustrate you. There's also a lot of unexpected modulations along the way as the tune goes along. But you'll get used to what's going on because it's a lot of fun. They go on around with some breaks for Zenón and percussion to poke out from, and some syncopated rhythm skips in the piano and bass. Zenón solos on and on smoothly over the top with speedy and happy melodic lines, mixing choppy phrases to the rhythm with more legato ideas, and getting exuberant in the high register with some interesting harmonic departures as well. He continues on to a new melody section. Cole gets some time to have fun drumming under cycling chords on piano and bass. Then Zenón returns for a line with Perdomo that changes up into a busier rhythmic section for Diaz to work the conga. They return to the melody and a couple of fun false endings, and then bring back the more settled original groove to a rather unresolved ending, surprisingly, but it's all in good fun. And that wraps it up. So it's an exciting recording celebrating the history of the Americas, both ethnic, political, but of course musical, particularly the many rhythmic influences and varieties of rhythms that developed in the Americas. The songs transform and take you on little journeys with unexpected diversions. Zenón's playing is almost always intense, but he has a smoothness to his sound even at his busiest moments. Perdomo impresses here, with his hands handling multiple rhythmic ideas at once and creative solos. And Głośnik on bass and Cole make a tight rhythm machine, and the percussion guests on the various tracks all add to the excitement and assortment of rhythmic feels and grooves on the journey. Exciting concept album with lots of interesting tunes.
Yeah, when Zenón takes on like a sort of project like this, I'm always amazed because he's got a lot of depth in his understanding of the different rhythms and musical styles of the Americans in general, and not just the United States, like almost the entirety of the Caribbean and the Central and South America as well. As you just incorporate so many different elements into his music, it makes for really interesting listening. So this album to me was intriguing all the way through, all the different rhythms and the time signatures and the sounds, and excellent soloing, some really surprising moments. Zenón, he's a high-speed soloist with a lot of content in his playing, and for me he reminds me of Rudresh Mahantapa, who he recently interviewed, but the content that they have in their playing is very different, whereas Zenón's has the elements from the Americas and all these different things, whereas Mahantapa has the jazz past and his Carnatic influence, and it all just kind of gets in there. And it's solos like this are just amazing to me, like the depth that they can put in. Anyway, I've actually got this one on order on CD, and I will be listening to it again. It was really intriguing.
Yeah, there's a lot to pick apart, and I was listening to it since we got the early release, sort of casually, just soaking it up. But then when I sat down to write my notes, I realized, well, I could use even more time to keep listening to sort of figure out everything.
Yeah, it's certainly going to take a long time to absorb the elements that are happening on this album.
Yeah, really inspired playing, and great piano work by Perdomo again. We get to hear him, within a few weeks on two really excellent recordings. So I feel like, he's going to go on to do more and more big things too. Well, there you go, an exciting list of Latin jazz to keep your late summer with high energy.
Yeah,
and, there's a lot of really good Latin jazz out now, so I'll try to get some more releases snuck into different categories. I think next week we're going to do piano. Is that right?
Yeah, we're on piano next week. Not piano solo and classical, but we'll just have the piano on all three recordings.
In general.
There will be a solo one in there too.
All right. I've got a lot to pick from, so I'll try to mix it up, get some variety.
I'm mixing it up a bit too. Yeah. There you go.
Just get back to the keyboard. And we've got a guitar episode coming up. We haven't done that in a while, so within a few weeks we'll get that in too.
Yeah, there's a new Shanchibe electric guitar. I'm really
he's back to electric. That's going to be interesting. Yeah,
that just came out. I haven't heard it yet, but we'll be talking about that on that episode. And I got some chamber music coming too, so when you're ready for that, maybe in between. It depends really. But next week is piano. You just mentioned Rudresh Mahantapa, who, if you haven't heard it yet, definitely go back and check out our interview with him last week. He's just finishing up his run at Smoke Jazz Club. I think tonight will be the last night. That's right. Well, by the time this is up, it'll be over. Yeah, it'll be or almost the same time that he'd be playing there. You can, by the way, you can see those performances. I think it's $15. You can pay to watch them online, and I think you get a day or something within the time of the performance to view it online. So if you can't make it to New York, and they may be wearing their superhero costumes. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, we don't know. But that's worth the price of admission just to see those capes. Yeah. But the music, from what he's posted on Facebook, it looks like they're having a really good time there. So you can they're not wearing superhero costumes on the post, huh? Not in the posts, no. Yeah, okay. So maybe in the last night they'll do it. Anyway, be sure to check out that interview if you haven't. It was a really good conversation. Yeah. And come back again for next week, episode 79, for some piano music. As always, we'll have some exciting things. And the playlist will be put up tomorrow after this episode, so you can check out the music 1 week ahead of time if you want to, only on Deezer, a preferred streaming platform. And we'll post some other things on the Facebook during the week if you want to check us out there. Look at our page. Maybe get some interaction with some of the people on this week's program. And the summer's coming to a close, Mike, but we've still got lots of good music to push in through the fall. So we'll go all the way to winter. And I have a feeling. Remember, we thought the Charles Lloyd trio was coming out, Yeah, it was supposed to come out on Friday, the 26th.
I have a feeling
they pushed it back.
I know why it didn't. That was a huge release day. I think there were like 30 other kind of big releases that came out on that day. And I think that's kind of it, because there was not really been anything in the last couple of days. I think that's like the end of summer kind of push. And so they probably wanted to make it come out and stand out on its own more. Not that Charles Lloyd wouldn't already, but, you know.
Right.
I think there's a teaser track up there, but I want to wait to hear the whole thing. So,
and there are two. Yeah, there are two. It's a trio of trios. And actually, if you bought the CD box set, which I did not do, you have all 3 albums already. You could have bought them.
You can get them already. Oh, okay.
Well, they're all sold out now, those boxes, because they were all signed,
right.
And they sold them as 3 of them. But now the rest of us, me and you too, have to wait for the other 2 to be released individually. So September 23rd is going to be the Oceans one, and then the Sacred Thread, I think it's called, is the last one. It's November 18th now, because that got pushed back as well.
Oh, well. We'll just have to wait.
Yeah, got to wait. Got to keep listening to Chapel, then. It's a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's got Bill Frisell on it.
Yeah. All right, lots to look forward to. Thanks, as always, to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing logo. And thanks for all you listeners who stuck with us through here. Check us out on Facebook. You want to write to us, Adult Music Podcast, all one word, @gmail.com. Be happy to hear from you. And until next week, episode 79, keep listening. And we'll see you again for some piano next week.